And we want to give way to our interpreters.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having us here. My name is Emily, and my co-interpreter today is Susan, and we represent the Tilde Language Justice Cooperative. The organizers of this event are firmly committed to facilitating multilingual communication in today's meeting, and so English to Spanish and Spanish to English simultaneous interpretation will be provided. Please listen carefully to the following instructions in order to access the interpretation. Buenos días, mi nombre es Emily y mi cointérprete hoy es Susan. Estamos representando la Cooperativa de Justicia del Lenguaje Tilde. Los organizadores de este evento tienen la firme determinación de facilitar la comunicación multilingüe en la reunión de hoy, así que contamos con interpretación simultánea de inglés a español y de español a inglés. Por favor, escuche atentamente a las siguientes instrucciones para acceder a la interpretación. If you joined on your phone, please make sure to join using the Zoom application so that you can access the interpretation function. And note that this function is not available on Chromebooks, unfortunately. Si usted se unió a la reunión con su teléfono, por favor asegúrese de entrar con la aplicación de Zoom para poder acceder a la función de interpretación. Y desafortunadamente, esta función no está disponible en los Chromebooks. There will be participants speaking in Spanish today, so if you want interpretation into English when participants speak, please select your language channel by going to the bottom right-hand corner of your Zoom screen, click on the globe icon if you're using the computer, or on 3 dots if you're connected by phone, select interpretation, then English, and then done at the end. Si usted quiere escuchar y participar en español, seleccione su canal de idioma haciendo clic abajo en la derecha de su pantalla en Zoom, en el icono del mundito si está usando una computadora o en los 3 puntitos si está conectado por teléfono. Seleccione interpretación, luego español y luego picarle en done o listo. Y algunas pautas para crear un espacio multilingüe. A few guidelines for creating multilingual spaces. Yo estoy hablando un poquito rápido porque estoy dando las instrucciones en ambos idiomas, pero ustedes, por favor, no hablan muy rápido. Eso puede pasar especialmente si uno está leyendo una presentación emocionada, nerviosa o al tener poco tiempo. También, si no está hablando, por favor, ponga su audio en silencio para que podamos escuchar todo lo que se dice en la reunión. I'm speaking a little bit quickly because I'm doing this introduction in both languages, but y'all please don't speak fast. This happens especially if you're reading a presentation, excited, nervous, out of time. And if you are speaking too fast, we will let you know. So please be attentive to the chat. We want to make sure we don't miss any important information in this exciting meeting. And if you're not speaking, please remember to mute yourself so we can hear everything clearly. Por último, les vamos a recordar que por favor hablen una persona a la vez, en un idioma por oración, y solo hable en el idioma que usted escogió. Si usted es bilingüe en español e inglés, no necesita escoger un canal. And finally, we remind you to please speak one at a time with one language per sentence and only speak in the language of the channel you chose. But remember, if you're bilingual in Spanish and English, you don't need to choose a channel. Estos espacios se crean con el apoyo de todos. Por favor, comunique cualquier problema por la ventana de chat o habilitando su micrófono. Gracias por crear este espacio multilingüe. We create these spaces with everyone's support, so communicate any issues you're having with the interpretation and by chat or by turning on your volume. And thank you so much for participating and creating this multilingual space.
Does anyone have questions about how to access the interpretation? Great. I'm just going to check if you're in the right room. Here we are for Crisis Response in the Bull City, a virtual public town hall, which is hosted by the Crisis Response Roundtable of the Durham Community Safety and Wellness Task Force. The Community Safety and Wellness Task Force is a joint task force between Durham City, County, and the Board of Education, and this gathering was convened in collaboration with the Department of Community Safety. We have some agreements that will guide us today. We will seek to maximize our learning without hindering anyone else's learning.
We will seek opportunities for unity, and we will embrace the possibilities for learning in disagreement.
Because we have a lot to do today, we will be respectful, flexible, and speedy as needed to move things forward.
With recognition of each other's experience and possible trauma, we will slow down and offer kind attention and curiosity towards each other.
It felt important to us to name the presence of trauma, especially with the sensitivity of the topic of crisis response. We're convening a public space that's recorded, that will be shared in the public sphere. And we're courageously having these conversations, sharing stories about some of the most tender moments in our lives in service of creating a different kind of crisis response that's more effective and transformative. Now it's your turn. We'd like to ask you to share your name and your hope for our time together into the chat box. And after you've done that, go ahead and rename yourself with your name and your pronouns. And if you're able and willing, please turn on your video so that we can feel more connected to each other. Here's how to rename yourself. Xavier, will you talk us through it?
Yeah, we would love for you to rename yourselves in your Zoom window. If you look for the three dots in your window at the upper right-hand corner, you see a prompt where you can change your name and pronouns. If you're on your phone, you can go to the participants icon and find the rename option.
So at least share your name and your hope for our time together into the chat box. And if you're not presently speaking, go ahead and keep yourself on mute. But if there's something you feel moved to say, please do. Lift your voice. I'm looking forward to learning. My hope today is that the space offers the city and task force a chance to listen deeply to Durham residents and learn from you in ways that inform, shape, and inspire our work around crisis response. We would like
to learn more about what these, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, wanting to learn more about what these other communities are doing to help us improve.
I'm looking forward to learning together, envisioning together, and creating together. I hope to find more ways we can keep us safe.
Happy to be able to get a better sense of the community's needs for safety and opportunity for safety and justice alternatives, covering this event for the Triangle Tribune.
Looking forward to learning more about other successful community safety work around the US.
Hoping to learn more about how other cities are reimagining community safety.
Looking forward to hearing stories of healing that have worked in Black, Indigenous, people of color communities.
Coming to feel better prepared to help Durham move forward.
Looking forward to learning more about what Durham has been working on and plans to do.
Looking forward to learning how to support this amazing movement towards transforming crisis in Durham.
I want to hear more about how we are keeping our children safe in school and after school athletics events. Lo mejor es la comprensión y empatía por todos. Edúcate y crece. Listening with love for our beloved community as we build a home where everyone can live their hopes and dreams.
Thank you. listening with love to our beloved community as we build a home where everyone can live their hopes and dreams.
Learn from and with my neighbors and generate ideas and energy towards a truly safer community for all of us.
Looking forward to learning how we as individuals can contribute to our community safety. As you see, we want to make this a collaborative space as much as possible, interactive. We'll keep doing some more interactive activities. We're going to move on, and we want you to keep putting your hopes and dreams into the chat.
If you're just joining us, or if you didn't catch the instruction earlier, please go ahead and change your name, as I have not. I'll go ahead and do it right in front of you. So I'm going to the participants box. I'm going to my face. I see 3 dots in the upper right. I'm going to click on the 3 dots, scroll down to rename, and then I'm going to write after my name, she, her, which are the pronouns I give. So Durham's Community Safety and Wellness Task Force is a hard-won gathering space, a hard-won decision-making space that Durham earned through community organizing and advocacy over a couple of years. And there was a proposal that came for creating a task force that would create more structural change. And Durham residents brought that proposal to the city, to the county, to the school board, and the 3 municipal bodies agreed to bring this body into being. So the first mandate is examine public safety and wellness needs of Durham residents and communities.
To educate residents on existing safety and wellness resources.
Design community-based prevention, intervention, and re-entry visions as alternatives to policing in the criminal legal system.
To propose safety and wellness policy and practices and recommend investment of public resources to municipal elected leadership.
After creating the bylaws to guide the work of the task force, the Durham City Council, the Durham Board of County Commissioners, and the Durham Public Schools Board of Education each appointed 5 members of the Durham community to serve and examine the public safety needs of Durham.
And so outside of community celebrations or maybe even campaign season, it's not often that our 3 elected bodies have a reason to collaborate on any given issue. In this case, we've experienced a rare jointly commissioned task force that's been tasked, as you've heard, to imagine new ways to address community safety needs. We just want to, again, point out that these 3 bodies work together at the behest of community voices to make this happen.
Here's a shout out to the other folks on the Community Safety and Wellness Task Force. We have incredible co-chairs. Their names are Marcia and Xavier. 4 roundtables, the School Resource Officer Roundtable with Nori, Tyler, Jesse, Alec, working together on the vision of policing free schools. Previously, Tanya was on that team, and now there's an open seat where Tanya has had to exit. There's a criminal legal system roundtable that deals with arrests, courts, jails. Jatoya, Muffin, Mike are helping us reimagine what arrests, courts, and jails could look like. Violence interruption and de-escalation roundtable with Wanda and Samuel. Previously, there was Cynthia as well, so there's another open seat. Tanya's seat was appointed by the school board, so I think that appointment would need to come from them, and Cynthia's seat was appointed by the city, so that appointment would need to come from the city. There's also a 911 and Crisis Response Roundtable, and that's Shanice, Isaac, Jennifer, Manju, in cooperation with the Department of Community Safety, who are the folks who are hosting this town hall today. And then you see you at the center of this process. We see you as part of this task force journey, a critical part of this task force journey. Without you, there is no task force. Because the intention here is that we are creating a participatory, democratic process of building community safety and wellness, not top-down, grassroots.
And so as you see here in this pandemic season, as is the case with other boards and commissions, we're meeting virtually. All meetings are public and can be accessed through the city's website. You can, once you get on the city's website, you can follow the government tab and then go to boards and commissions. And the full task force does meet every second Wednesday of the month at 6 p.m. Also on that website, you'll see the times and Zoom links for roundtable meetings as they occur.
We are expected to accomplish our mission within 24 months, and we have the option to add 6 months in order to complete our assignment with the care, time, and attention it needs. So far, we have reviewed the existing safety and wellness resources. We formed these 4 roundtables, SROs, violence interrupter programs, courts and jails, and crisis response. And we conducted some listening sessions so far. And then today, our first public town hall, but not our last. And here's the same visual in Spanish. So you see that we are about a quarter of the way through our journey so far. This work. Oh, fantastic. This is a little video interpretation of where we are in our 6 months in journey. We're just really a caterpillar of a task force that is forming a chrysalis as we speak. Oh, and that video is from D.L. Anderson, who lives in Durham, and his son Asa. Oh, there's a question about what do we mean by SROs? School resource officers are law enforcement officers who are inside school buildings. And please feel free to keep popping questions into the chat. There are folks from the task force who are committed to answer them as they pop up.
Absolutely. So we want to take some time to share about our intentions in hosting this crisis response in the Bull City Town Hall. And so here's the first, number one, is to offer clarity about what the Community Safety and Wellness Task Force is here to do and where we are in our timeline.
We want to hear resident visions for the Department of Community Safety. The Department of Community Safety wants to introduce their work, share their current priorities and where they are in their timeline.
We'd like to hear stories and get feedback from community members about current experiences in crisis, about how we feel during interactions with first responders, and about what happens when we don't call 911.
And we want to find out what Durham residents are aware of, what's happening out in the world, and dreaming about as alternatives to policing.
We want to define what success would look like, what success would feel like, according to Durham residents, both in terms of broad vision and in terms of concrete changes that we want to see happen.
We will determine next steps for residents about how we can stay involved. And we'll leave feeling a sense of responsibility and ownership as Durham residents in building community safety and wellness in Durham. Now we'd like to introduce our dear colleague, Ryan Smith from the Department of Community Safety in the City of Durham.
Thank you so much. Good morning, all. My name is Ryan Smith. I am the director of the city's new Department of Community Safety, and I am really happy and appreciative of this space that we have together. I want to start off with 3 words of thanks. First, I would like to thank all of you for making time today and hopefully tomorrow to join us, because if we're going to be successful in this work, we all have important roles to play. And spaces like this and time to spend together like this are so crucial to our success. And so thank you for taking time. Next, I'd like to thank the members of our task force, especially the members of this roundtable. But our task force members, for those of you who do not know, have been meeting since late April, and they are putting in a lot of work because they love Durham, because I just am so appreciative of their leadership, of their public service, and of the hours and hours that they are volunteering in this work. And so to all of you, I've said this to you, but in this space, I just want to let you know how thankful I am, how grateful I am that the department has such a task force as this to collaborate with. So thank you. And then I'd also like to thank members of the Community Safety Department, and especially today, Dwayne and Shannon, who have been working behind the scenes in a support role. And I appreciate the ways that you support this work every day. So thank you. Let me just tell you a little bit about the Community Safety Department briefly and where we're at. The department exists to bring people together across neighborhoods and agencies and organizations to reimagine what public safety can look like and what additional investments we can make and actions we can take together to create more of a shared sense of safety and security across Durham, and to do so in a way that doesn't involve law enforcement or the criminal justice system. We think that in order to succeed in that work, that the work needs to be equity-oriented and trauma-informed, and that it needs to be people-centered and data-driven, and that it must be highly collaborative. And I think spaces like this live into those values. They're a beginning of it. And you know, as at least the director of the department, it is my hope that a town hall like this, and I know that this is a shared vision of the task force, is really a kicking off place for a continued ongoing in-depth engagement with residents on what this work can look like. So again, my hope both for the task force and for spaces like this is that we leave spaces like this with a real sense of, a clearer sense of what the work can look like and the kinds of things that we can do together. And I'm appreciative again of this time. I'll talk a little bit about what we are working on to date. So the department has 3 broad focus areas in its first year. The first is that we have been charged with developing and launching pilots this year that will support alternative responses to 911 calls. And we were going to learn today, there's a session at 10:45 that starts, where we will actually get to see what that could look like and what it's looking like in other communities. We'll hear from Atlanta and from Denver and from San Francisco that are actually already doing this work. And so I'm excited both to hear from them and to hear from you, your thoughts about that and other things that you envision in that work. We are committed to launching pilots this fiscal year. So before July 1st, we will have pilots in the field that we can learn from, where we are beginning to send teams of unarmed trained responders to a subset of 911 calls that today may be responded to by law enforcement. And we can talk a lot more about that and look forward to sharing more with you as those plans develop. But this is an important piece of developing those plans. Listening to you and engaging with residents will help shape that work. We are also looking at other aspects of this work. And another example is something called crisis call diversion, which a few cities are doing across the country, which recognizes that 911 is an important place where calls come in, and that by embedding clinicians and other types of personnel into 911, we can be better positioned to understand the needs of residents, to divert calls that are appropriate away from a law enforcement response to other types of responders, especially calls that may involve mental and behavioral health needs. And that is another type of pilot that we are learning about and very interested in as one of the kinds of things that we might do. But we come to this work, we being at least the department, really believing that expertise lives all over Durham, and that together we can think through a variety of things that we might do, because it's going to not be one answer, but many things. And it's not going to be one person, but many people who advance this work. So we all have an important role to play, and I am really excited for the time that we have together and really looking forward to stop talking now and to begin listening deeply. So again, thank you to our task force for inviting us to this space, and I'm ready for the next part. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. So I heard Ryan say, let's dream boldly, Durham. This is our space to reimagine public safety together. We'd like to imagine over the next 2 days, what if the way that we practiced crisis intervention became a portal for transforming our lives, our relationships with each other, and our very community fabric. Xavier, do you want to take us through some gratitudes? You could kick us off.
Sure, absolutely. So we definitely want to give major thanks to all those members of the Durham Community Safety Wellness Task Force, to Marcia, my co-chair, to Ryan, Dwayne, Shannon, and James with the new Department of Community Safety, Ajane, to Amber Wade, City, County, School Board liaisons to the task force, to Tilde Language Justice, which is a worker-owned cooperative based right here in the Bull City. And of course, they're really doing a great job this morning of making sure that we are a fully immersed community. To our special guests that are coming up from Atlanta, Denver, San Francisco, sharing about their own brilliant experiments in radical care. And most of all, we want to thank you, each of you, for showing up and for participating as we move forward. We appreciate you being present, open, and connected with us, and for being so invested in building justice, peace, and healing in Durham. So that is our opening, believe it or not. We wanted to, if nothing else, make sure everybody had a chance to come in, but we want to give an overview of where we've been and where we are. So we're going to get into the actual agenda items. I want to invite Task Force member Shanice Hamilton to the facilitators table, one of our hot seats. And I'm looking at 2 screens and all kinds of stuff. So during this interactive section, we are definitely going to ask you for your input to these questions that we have. So the first question that we're bringing forth, to me, it starts with neighborhoods. For you, it could be other places, but the question itself is, how are we already keeping each other safer? And so I'll just start off and model, then I'll pass it over to Shanice. For me, first of all, been in Durham since 1989 as a resident. I was here in 1980 as a student at NCCU and came back in 89 to live. And as many people have in their careers and time in this place, I started off renting, got married, brought my wife up here. We moved into a home and are now into a second neighborhood. The neighborhood's very different. The neighborhood we're in now, we've been here for now 11 years. And I will say that for most of our time here, we felt very isolated. But during the pandemic, during the times when our neighbors were and us were all kind of stuck in our homes for safety reasons, there were a lot more people that we saw walking around, as opposed to driving into your garage, closing the door, and never to be seen again until you drive back out the next morning. And I'm thankful for my neighbors, because my wife and I have had some very frank conversations during the multiple crises that we've been through in the last couple of years. Our neighborhood actually, on every Thursday for a 2 or 3 month period, we're just doing marches around the neighborhood with people that we had not really had conversations with. We now have very, very close relationships with the people on our street, not just knowing names, but understanding their hopes and dreams for their families, their children. There are many more gatherings. And so safety and community from a neighborhood standpoint has changed in my neighborhood because of the crises. And one of our responses to the social justice issues that we experience, to the health crises that we're still experiencing, has been to come out of our homes, to have conversations in the middle of the street. Yes, we have that kind of street where there's not a lot of traffic, fortunately, and we can do that. And just talk to each other. And that's been very gratifying to my wife and myself. So that's a start. It's as Ryan said, and many others will say, I'm sure, there are many ways to get to safety. There are many people that have to get involved. So that's one thing that I've been very grateful for, and a lot of gratitude toward my neighbors for doing what we have to do to become more aware of what our neighbors' needs are. And I'll pass it over to Shanice, and then once she's finished, I'm going to do my best. We're going to do our best to look at the windows, and we would like for you to use the raised hand function. And I'm actually not seeing it myself. We want to make sure that we can identify persons. Somebody help me out here. Is the raise hand function available? Is it under, it's under reactions.
Under reactions.
Thank you so much. So under reactions, when we want to hear your story. So if you would, under reaction, put the raise hand, we'll call on you, and we want to hear from you. Shanice.
Hi, everyone. I will say that I have definitely inherited a lot of my grandmother's tendencies. I'm the nosy neighbor who is constantly looking out the window. I'm walking around the neighborhood with my little one, always on the lookout to see what's going on, making sure that we're okay. If the police are in the neighborhood, I'm like walking up, asking, hey, what are y'all doing out here today? Just to make sure that everything is kosher. I will say a little while ago, I was actually running out to get milk for my little one. And as I was getting ready to leave the neighborhood, I went around like this little bend and there was a little girl standing outside, and she was in front of a tree, and the bottom of the tree was on fire. And I'm like, that doesn't seem right. So I stop and I hop out and I'm like, hey, are you okay? Like, what's going on? And she was like, I don't know. There's just this, like, somebody set this on fire. I just saw, and my aunt lives right here. And this little girl was no more than like 7 or 8 years old, just like playing outside. And we're not sure like where or how the fire was started, but I pulled her back, called for the fire truck to come. And I'm like, and they put it out and it was fine. They told us not to touch it because like the entire bottom of the tree was on fire. The little girl's parents came out and were like really grateful. And I was grateful to be there and just be of service, like in that moment, to assist and help out. And that's the type of like, just like opening and just decency and protection that I feel thankful for, that a lot of my neighbors have out here with me and my little one, who loves to run away. That's like his number one thing. He will take off as soon as we get down the steps into the parking lot. And I've had neighbors grab him up for me if I'm, carrying the 50 million things that moms carry down to the cars every single day. And so I think just for me, it's just been keeping a lookout for my people, whether I know you or not. This community is my community, and we're all each other's people. And I think it's important for us to do whatever we can in all the ways that we can to absolutely look out for each other. And so as we begin to continue to imagine what safety can look like for us, we want to take some time to open the floor up to you all and hear ways that we're already keeping each other safe in this community. And let's see if folks can use the raise hand reaction or drop it in the chat stack, then we can call in some folks and hear your experiences.
Palestine Small, I believe is raise your hand.
Hi, everybody. I am Palestine Small, and I love hearing the stories about how you guys are just responding to your community. I think that is awesome. Community needs, community engagement, and being able to, as Shanice so eloquently put it, look out for your neighbor or your neighbor's child. I think one of my concerns is I am really connected to the senior community. Although I work for Durham County, I work with seniors in my church. I work with seniors in the community. And some of my concerns is with the, well, there's a couple of things that I noticed that goes on with seniors, and they're preyed upon by telemarketers and people coming to their door and these kind of things. And so that has been some of my experience during the pandemic. One of my seniors that I look out for on the weekend would get these calls from these people, saying we need money, the children are starving, cancer is everywhere, or something or another, and which is all valid things that we can support. But when you have a 92-year-old that lives alone, has a heart of gold, and is not quite in charge of all of her faculties and would like to give to these organizations, then that is one of the concerns that I have about our seniors. And I have experienced that with her. But she does have, children that are very adamant about keeping her safe and in the community. And so I would like to see something from this whole safety and community and initiative that you guys are starting that could include our seniors as well. And thank you for letting me speak.
Our pleasure. We do have Juana Dominguez writing in the chat that she's happy living in Durham, and it's very nice to know that there are good projects to help the community. Thank you for lifting that up, Juana. Again, this space is open. This is your turn. Joy Spencer.
Good morning, y'all.
Good morning.
Question is, let me look. What ways are we already keeping each other safe? And I wanted to just highlight what Shanice was saying. The most I've been able to feel like I have a safety net because of my community, because of the people that I can call, neighbors that I have, excuse me, given my phone number to, people that we talk to keep each other updated on predators in our community, keep each other updated on abusers in our community, keep each other updated on opportunities, so on and so forth. And so I will say that community has been a strong safety net as well for me.
I definitely resonate with that. I've said it 1,000,001 times. This community has saved me. And so I'm grateful for that. And we would love to hear from other folks ways that we are keeping each other safe. Abby, I saw that you had posted something in the chat. Would you like to come off and say a little bit more about that?
Sure. I'm just echoing everyone that, you know, our care and love comes from knowing each other and our relationships. And I'm just here because I'd love to see that expanded throughout the whole city. And I think COVID and any crisis really reveals what we have and what we need. And I saw just a lot of going door to door and just getting to know each other, learning about each other, what we need. And then as neighborhoods, prioritizing who needs the most and what we have that we can share with each other, whether it's grocery runs or health supplies and I just see that as a model expanded outward. I also think a lot about who has access to that, right? So when I moved to my family moved to a new neighborhood, I found out about a WhatsApp chat group, got on there, asked if anyone had a ladder I could borrow. Next thing I know, 5 minutes later, there's a ladder in front of my house. And I used that ladder to put up a swing, like one of those big round spiderweb net swings right in front of the house, meant to signal like this is for everyone. And next thing I know, the next day, there are 5 kids on the swing. So like these things together, right? But I had access to that WhatsApp group. I had a smartphone. I spoke the language of people who were on that WhatsApp chat, right? So like, I want that kind of, we are resourceful, we support each other, we're learning about each other. But I'm also thinking about the barriers for everybody to have that. And maybe, so I'm here for all that. And I'm that neighbor too. I love, like, we moved in and within a day, I knew everybody on the block and who has kids and who my kids are running around with and like who speaks what languages and who cooks what and let's make a meal together. Like I'm just that person, but it shouldn't rely on the accident of having that neighbor on your block, right? We should have these systems in place where that's just how we operate. So yeah, thanks. And I saw a lot of that. There were a lot of great lessons out of COVID, a lot of horrible things and a lot of really great lessons about how we can know each other and care about each other.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I was with your comment about WhatsApp and then what Joy was saying earlier about, people sharing phone numbers, definitely much better than the other app, what's that neighborhood thing that everybody uses? It feels so
Next door.
Next door to me feels toxic and antagonistic. There's nothing like sharing phone numbers or coming together on a WhatsApp. Alex, I'm sorry, Ajax Woolley, before you go on, there's some things in the chat where Raquel mentioned that her community, Southside, keeps constantly communicated on safety issues via WhatsApp. And Palestine also mentioned that Palestine's like that she likes that people are sharing ideas and household items. Yes, especially during COVID. Yeah. So Ajax, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks very much, y'all. I just wanted to piggyback on what a couple of folks were saying about access. And I wanted to acknowledge and bring to the table the ways in which our history as a city has created unequal access through land use policy and how neighborhoods are delineated sometimes. So in the same way that we work with our neighbors in our neighborhoods to build safety nets, we also need to think about how we're going to branch beyond those boundaries that show up on the maps that form the police districts, the neighborhood associations, the protected areas with things like neighborhood protection overlays and historic districts. Those are lines that exist because of, in some cases, because of ways of thinking that are in contrast with the spirit of this initiative. So I'd encourage everyone to just educate ourselves and each other about the ways in which some of those things are outmoded.
definitely appreciate that nudge to not just think about our own particular neighborhoods and communities. As I said earlier, that was our opening prompt, but we do want you to imagine all the ways that we keep each other safe. And one way, as Ajax so eloquently put it, is to think of the neighborhoods beyond yours, to think of those neighbors who don't have the same access that we may have to opportunities, to each other, to sidewalks, to safely crossing the street. I could go on. I'm waiting for someone you don't want me to keep talking because I'll do it. We actually put a lot of time for this segment because we felt that there would be a good number of participants here. We really want to hear from you. Thank you. Faye is raising her hand.
I'll figure out how to unraise my hand later. Yeah, hi, my name is Faye, she, they. I'm just kind of what a lot of folks are saying about, the access thing. I think an experience that really struck me recently was when trying to do some like door knocking, and how, especially I think with a lot of like the new apartment complexes coming in, it's kind of like the lack of access to like other community, like a lot of it seems like communities and whatnot are actually trying to keep others out in a way, and it's this weird balance of you want to stay safe, but you have a lot of like gated card access things, and it's like you can't even like get into a certain area. And it's so, yeah, it's just been kind of interesting for me to reflect on, because I live in a neighborhood where, it's like it's houses, so people can just walk around and like, get to know each other. But there are specifically communities that it's like you can't get into and have that integration sort of thing. So.
We do have some, thank you for that, Faye. We do have some more chat activity where Kylie is saying, that's right, Ajax. Kylie's going to say that her neighborhood is a suburb that's historically segregated, complete with a homeowners association and a private security patrol. David is saying that having lived in the community for over 5 years, it breaks his heart to see flat earth protesters appearing in the city center. Mind you is reminding us that we to rename ourselves with our pronouns. And if you're just joining us, please hover over your cursor, click on the 3 dots together in the top right, and you can rename yourself with your name and pronouns. And if you're able, turn on your video so you can send good energy to the speakers. I'm definitely enjoying these smiles. The question that we're dealing with right now is, in what ways are we already keeping each other safe? I did want to ask Leonardo. He had put an acronym in the chat earlier, so I want to ask him to speak more about that. And we all know Leonardo is not shy. Where are you, dude? Did we lose him?
Might have stepped away for a minute.
Yeah.
Another thing that I'll lift up, I've moved away from Durham several times, and clearly I've always come back. But one, and I know there are a lot of technology barriers. One thing I do want to lift up is the groups that we have here in Durham that maybe there are other places now, but I wasn't aware of them when I was staying in other cities and other states. Like Bull City Shares on Facebook has been a savior for me. And I know so many other families plenty of times in seeking different things and also offering different things to the community and as a form of sharing, interacting with one another, and just being there for one another and our needs. And I think those type of groups and us coming together in that way as well is another form of safety for us, knowing that even though we may not know every individual, you know, in that group, being able to reach out to a community for resources when we need to, and to have that community actually open up and try to figure it out and get it to us, I think it's been like, whew, I'm thankful for that as well. So I wanted to lift that up. And would love to hear from others around ways that we're keeping each other safe. Joy, did you want to speak on uplifting the strong role that community-rooted leaders and organizations play in in community safety? Because I think that's really important.
Yeah, sure. I wonder if the Warren Langley is on. My 3-year-old is doing the 3-year-old thing, and I can come right back. I don't mean to call nobody out, but I saw him in the chat.
Dwarren, are you there? Joe was calling you out.
Yes. The 1,000 Black Men is a new initiative that is really just trying to galvanize Black men to support many of the current and ongoing community-based organizations that are supporting boys and young men of color. And so they are going to be helping to create a repository of Black men that can support through mentorship and in direct engagement, as well as doing advocacy and raising funds to support mentoring organizations here in Durham.
Thank you for that. And thank you for placing the website in the chat for those who would like to take a look at what they are all about. And we thank you for being a part of pulling that together. There's a great story here in the chat from Christina. She says she wants to shout out an older gentleman who found her wallet this past Tuesday on 9th Street. The wallet had the debit card and a significant amount of cash and an ID. The gentleman drove 16 minutes to a house to drop off the wallet with nothing missing. Christina had no idea that the wallet had been dropped and was able to interact with him through the Ring doorbell because Christina at the time was at work. But just shouting out this gentleman who was an exemplar citizen. And she's saying how grateful she is to live in Durham and to have that gentleman to be the one to find the wallet. And Rose is kind of saying she's also had that experience of someone driving 15 minutes to her place just as she was about to leave for a work trip. Abby is lifting up that a strong multiracial democracy in Durham keeps us safe, creating this task force and the elected members who support the task force to even question and change how we imagine safety. This is not to be taken for granted. Amen to that. And Scott's saying, had an experience where a man flew out from Durham to LA to return a wallet. That's amazing. That is truly amazing.
That really is. Yes, I also want to shout out all of the folk who, mom brain with a 2-year-old, you're bound to drop something, misplace something like all the time. And I constantly fortunately and unfortunately, have people who will be like, hey, miss, you dropped your phone. Hey, miss, you dropped your keys. And I'm so thankful to those people all the time, just like the good-heartedness of like our people in this community. Yeah, so yeah, really grateful for that. Joy, you're back on camera, so I'm gonna pass over to you again.
And thank you. Thank y'all for lending me grace. It was, that moment. So yeah, I wanted to uplift the role that community rooted leaders and community rooted organizations play in safety in our community, and wanted to pay homage to communities in partnership for defining community rooted leader for us and really helping us to be intentional about what that means. But what that means to me is that there is an entire cadre and network of folks in this community that have gained trust from the community. And that is because they are of the community. That is because they are experiencing the same pain points that the people that they serve experience in real time. And so they have like a deeper understanding of those experiences and how to resolve those experiences. And that has played a really critical role. I'm experiencing a safety concern, and I reached out to some community rooted leaders, and they band together and helped me, for example, to get cameras for my home, which is something that I could not afford. And they helped me, for example, to get a system, the Google Home system, where I could say, Alexa, call 911 if my abuser decides to break into my home again. And I would not have been able to do that without community. And I would not have reached out for that assistance without trusting, okay, I got you, baby girl, without trusting our community leaders to let them in on what was going on and ask for that type of help.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Joy. The trust in our people is definitely necessary, and their trust in us is necessary as well. So thank you for lifting that up. Do we have anyone else who would like to share ways that we're already keeping each other safe? Leslie, I see your hand.
Morning, everybody. Hi. I think I just want to call out the value of public space as well in general, and the ways in which, could we have more of it? Sure, but we do have, a variety of public spaces versus kind of privatization. So I know folks have talked about gated communities, thinking about, privatized, malls versus walking around streets with shops, things like that as well. Of course, places, parks, et cetera. Just those to me are really places where we can have more of a voice in what safety means in those spaces. So there's just something about that I just want to call out. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie, for that sharing. Faye, I see your hand is up.
Hi, sorry, it's me again. But I just wanted to, since we're talking about, building relationships, community building, I did want to, in the chat, I'm gonna drop a link to an upcoming workshop that is part of a Building Beloved Community book series by Durham Beyond Policing. And so our first workshop is gonna be next Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. And it's called Know Your Neighbors, Transformative Justice 101. And I think it's going to be touching upon a lot of the subjects we're like talking about here with relationship building sort of being the center of, community accountability work. And it'll be in part facilitated by the lovely Manju, who's here today. So another great opportunity to see Manju. So yeah, I'll just drop that info in the chat. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Faye, for that. That was really, really, really sweet. And a huge shout out to Durham Beyond Policing, who started this work to get us to this place that we are now. Let's see, we have a few more people. Oh, wait.
Juana, Palestine, Chi.
Juana, and then we'll do Palestine and a Chi.
Sí, sí, hola. Sí, quisiera compartirles, comentarles que en este tiempo de pandemia, a principios de la pandemia, en las escuelas públicas de Durham, la señora Alexandra Valladares hizo un chat para los padres y de esa forma nos mantenimos conectados e informados sobre diferentes situaciones que estaban pasando a los papás que necesitaban información de algo, pues allí lo pegaban la información o recursos y de esa manera pues nos sentimos seguros y al mismo tiempo pues ¿cómo puedo explicar? No sentirnos, bueno, sentir el apoyo de todos cuando uno necesitaba algo, saber algo. Y de esa manera, bueno, nos sentimos seguros con respecto a la situación de la pandemia. Y ya por el momento, pues ese chat y grupos de chat de los padres de las escuelas, pues ha ayudado también para la vacunación de los niños mayores de 12 años. Bueno, es una manera más fácil y rápida de estar conectados. Y yo pienso que en los vecindarios eso sería una buena idea.
I can do a quick consecutive summary. We do have simultaneous translation for simultaneous interpreting for everyone. And I'll paste the instructions in the chat, but just quickly what Juana was sharing is that school board member Alexandra Valladares helped to create a WhatsApp group or a chat group for school parents in Durham, I think specifically for Spanish speakers. And that's where parents were able to share their worries, their questions, and get access to resources. And it's been very helpful for staying safe during the pandemic. It's also been very helpful for finding information about vaccines for their children above 12 years old. And so Juana's suggestion is that every neighborhood should have access to a group chat like this for those kinds of resources. And I'll be putting the interpretation instructions in the chat, so make sure to join interpretation so you can hear the simultaneous interpreting after this.
Thank you so much. Palestine, you're up next, and then Chi.
Okay, so I love these stories of neighbors helping neighbors. I live in Durham County, but I have a shared housing model in Wake County where I take in seniors who get less than $1,000 a month to share the bills. And so I hadn't heard from one of my guys, and so calling, texting, nothing. And so I went to the house, and he was diagnosed with COVID, and he didn't know what to do. And so, some of us ladies have that nurturing kind of thing. So, hey, put on my hazmat suit. I'm taking you to the hospital, blah, blah, blah. So we go through the whole thing. We get him straightened out, get back to the house, get everything sanitized. And so the story says that, when you haven't heard from your neighbors. So when somebody hasn't heard from me or somebody hasn't heard from you and somebody to go and the calling and the texting is not working, you know, we have to, we can go and knock on our neighbor's door, you know, especially during COVID, especially for our seniors. He's 74, he made it through fine, he's doing great because he had been vaccinated. This is just my belief. You know, I don't know how people feel about vaccine, not trying to cast in a shade on that, but it's my belief that because he had those shots, the severity of the disease did not, you know, cause him to lose his life. And so I just want to say that for all of those who check on their neighbors, who call their neighbors, who help them navigate through any COVID situation, any school situation, especially if they don't know the information and they don't know what to do. That's what helps me and reminds me and keeps my community safe. And so even though the story is out of Wake County, it's still, you know, I'm hoping to expand the model and be able to put more seniors together so that they can look out for each other, but also to kind of have a little bit of oversight so that someone can be looking out for them and advocating for them as well. So that's my safe community.
Look at you doing like the revolutionary work. Like that is so, oh, I love that. I love the program that you have with grouping folks together to be able to do it together. That's, oh, I'm sorry, I got like mushy for a second. Chi, pass it off to you.
Thank you. It's really powerful to see everybody here. I'm just, as I'm looking through the different names and different people, as Joy said, there are a lot of community rooted leaders in Durham, folks that are leading with relationship and empathy and love for our community and our people. And I just want to lift up some of the folks that I see here. Folks like Joy Spencer, who's working on, you know, our early childhood action plan, and lifting up our young people and lifting up how we can create this world for our young people to live in, where they can thrive and love each other and live in their love. And I'm lifting up Shanice, who has a young one who is also coincidentally my godchild, and the world that she's creating for him, showing him how to be an activist at age 2, showing him that the world in Durham that he lives in can be a really beautiful one, and whatever he sees in it, he can make in it. I'm seeing Ajax here, who, you know, is a part of Durham Can, doing work with our Durham housing or public housing residents, and you know, creating spaces for our residents to be safe and to be able to you know, have a safe haven in their community where they don't have to worry about lead poisoning, where they don't have to worry about sewage water, where they don't have to worry about carbon monoxide, and they have gardens where they can create their own food and where they can learn about the earth and sustain the earth and steward the earth with each other. And I'm just seeing so many people here who are looking after our communities with each other, in relationship with each other. And not one of us is doing this alone. And I see that power here in our community in Durham, and the power that we all have in living in our abundance, knowing that, you know, so often our communities are living off of scarcity, and really we have so much here. Just look at the people that are here doing the work that they're doing. And so much power here. So I think that gives me hope. That gives me hope that we're all keeping each other safe with all the strengths that we have and the love that we have for each other. So I see that every day. And I thank y'all for being here.
Thank you, Chief, so much. That was a lot. And thank you for that. No, but it was definitely needed. Thank you for that heartfelt reminder of the assets that are all around us. Speaking of assets, of course, in the chat, quite a few shout outs for a board member. Okay, I lost my place here. Yep, with DeWarren, And I believe Enjoy, yes. Just talked about how Board Member Valladares is deeply rooted, and she's present in the community as a partner with individuals, community-based organizations, giving her their love. We have a story where someone is saying they like Miss Sharp, saying how she's I like how my community has a neighborhood watch, which shows people care about their community and each other. Raquel was saying that people are being more vigilant in their neighborhoods. They're calling 911 for unknown people, cars, or suspicious activity in their neighborhoods. Yes, we're talking about how we already keeping each other safe. Before we talk about other neighborhoods, other cities, just want to kind of lift up the different ways, in many ways, we're doing this for each other, for our neighbors, and for ourselves. I see Leonardo did join us back. I want to give him a chance to talk more about the 1,000 Black Men initiative. He said his phone had conked out on him. Did I do it again? The question is, how are we keeping each other safe? The lines are open. Rose has raised her hand. Thank you, Rose.
Thank you. So I was living at the time in one of the many apartment complexes that are around Durham. So it's not really like a neighborhood where there's like a watch or a community group or anything like that. And my apartment was broken into, just like someone kicked in the door, smash and grab a bunch of stuff. And that can feel very I felt very violated at the time, it just makes having the space where you live in, having a stranger there and taking your stuff. And I needed a place to go afterwards because my door was totally kicked in. So there was no way to sort of lock and close the space afterwards after the police left. But luckily one of my good friends lived across the street from me. So what made me feel safe in that moment was being able to go over to her place. And she is one of my best friends. So she let me we slept in the same bed together so that I had a friend there just to provide a space of comfort and safety. And after a moment that was a little bit scary. So just that interaction is what came to my mind of what made me feel safe in Durham.
Thank you for sharing that, Rose. We also have in the chat, oh, I've lost my place too. Ajax added, thanks, Chi. I need to add that ideally the DHA residence leaders who do allow us to learn from their experiences would be here. Also, to allow us to learn from their experiences, to speak directly to the community safety concerns. Yeah, and yeah, so grateful for you sharing that, Rose. Do we have anyone else, or is Leonardo back on? No, okay.
We also in the chat have Jennifer just saying that it does feel violating when those events happen. She is saying, yes, you work in your community with them. They are leaders that we uplift as well. Mind you, saying, I'm so sorry that happened to you, Rose. So grateful to hear how lovingly you were supported by your friend after that violation of your home space. And thank you for sharing. We are here to talk about safety, but it's hard to talk about safety, but also not, bringing up ways that harm is present as well. So we do invite you, if you would like to share your experiences coming out of or dealing with handling things that aren't going as well. Please, this space is open for you. I think one thing that's really important to speak to is just a reminder that we are a community. None of us have to go through anything alone. Just in this space, grateful to be sharing this space with Shanice. If you don't know Shanice, you should get to know Shanice. She's the kind of person that even in a virtual space like this, you can't be in her presence and just not feel better. I appreciate you sharing this space with me and all of you for sharing your stories. We do have a few more minutes, about 10 more minutes before we take our break. So we don't want to leave anyone out. We have it in chat. Elin says, I do have a question, but I do have to leave. My question is anything in place about discussing the issue we have with the car racing that is taking place all over Durham? This has been an ongoing issue. It has been a very scary topic that needs to be addressed. Thank you. I think one thing that we talked about in our task force meeting on this past Wednesday is how easily we could expand the roundtables to other issues. That's not something that I've considered as a part of our charge. It's something that we didn't talk about. I also, particularly going down Roxborough Road, oh my God, or Duke Street on that North Durham side, where it's just a lot of straight streets. I have seen so many, particularly three-wheelers, motorcycles especially, and some cars too, just really getting around us and going in ways that really made me feel unsafe on the streets. So thank you for lifting that. I did mention in our task force meeting this week that Marcia and I are going to kind of go back and look at all the things that were lifted up and see, are there still some gaps that we know we can't touch every problem, but those discussions need to be had, and we need to make sure that we are mapping our community needs as broadly as possible, knowing that we will have some specific recommendations moving forward. Isak.
Yes, thanks. Since I'm on the task force, I didn't want to take time from other people in the community sharing, but since no one else has their hand up, I thought I'd share how I've experienced our community here in Durham keeping me safe. Two stories come to my mind. One was, well, I don't know now, maybe a couple of years ago before the pandemic, when I was pulled over for unknown reason here in my neighborhood, that people I didn't know stopped and just watched from the other side of the road, making sure that I was okay, when the police asked me all sorts of questions and then let me go without a citation. So that's one way that I just, strangers, nobody that I've ever met before, just willing to monitor to make sure that I'm okay from that interaction. And another was when I've been arrested and in jail, that people who are connected to my life found out that I was in jail and showed up and waited there in the jail until I was released, were willing to pay bond if I needed bond. Just showed me that there's community that I've built here over the years who care about my well-being and will be there for me. So those are just two stories of, my gratitude for people that I know and strangers I've never met, making sure that I'm okay. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing, Isak. Mind you, I see your hand before we get to you. I do want to lift up a chat that I missed from Jackie. She says her neighborhood meets monthly to build community, to get to know neighbors, and to share any relevant information. If people miss the meeting, someone always takes notes and shares on the Nextdoor app. Neighbors are also very active on that app for any urgent safety concerns. And we do want to give some space to Shannon as well for the activity that she has planned for us, but going to Maju.
I'll keep it super brief. There was just a period where a number of ICE raids were happening in Durham and in surrounding counties, and local organization Siembra trained a bunch of us to do to figure out who ICE agents were and be able to document and disseminate information to help keep each other safe. And ICE's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and we developed a network to keep in touch with each other. And when community members suspected that immigration law enforcement had entered their neighborhood or a workplace or a community space, we had like a rapid response team organized to work in pairs and identify what was going on and share information with the community through word of mouth channels to get folks away who would be vulnerable to the potential of deportation or detention.
Thank you for sharing that, Manju. And also thank you for helping co-facilitate this space as well. Again, as I was saying with Shanice, just being around you, you just feel like you can do it all. Shannon is saying to me that we don't really need an activity. That was a plan B in case there was not robust conversation, which we have had, and this has been time well spent. Do have about 2 more minutes for, thank you. Jenny has raised her hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to share about a time that my daughter, who has some behavioral health needs, she had a pretty significant and violent meltdown as I was bringing my 3 kids out of the doctor's office. And she's my middle child, and I had a baby at the time. And I just remember as she's kind of melting down, and I'm trying to juggle baby and what she needs. I'm sorry about my dogs. A teenage girl who happened to be nearby came up and asked if she could hang out with my baby for a little while I kind of focused on my daughter. And it definitely, it meant the world to us in that moment.
That's a powerful story.
Uh-huh.
Thank you so much. Do we have anyone else before we break? I do want to mention, just in response, Jenny, that reminds me of my 8-year-old granddaughter. I just am glad she's in this world and for her peers, because she's that kind of person that's just going to want to stop and help. And whether it's a turtle trying to cross the street, she's so observant and empathetic at such a young age. And I really hope that will be the case for her entire generation as we pass on this life to them. So just so grateful to hear that story.
Yeah.
Just does my heart good. More justice for turtles. That's good. That's good. So Shanice, before we close it out, of course, our next segment is coming up after the break at 10:45. We're going to hear from 3 alternative response programs that are currently operating in Atlanta, Denver, and San Francisco. So after the break, we hope you do stick around. Shanice, I'll let you close the segment out.
Awesome. I just want to say thank you, everyone, for engaging around this question of what are the ways that we're already keeping each other safe. As we continue to grow and build on the structures that we already have, I think we all felt that it was really important for us to first ground in all of the ways that we're already doing this for one another. And so really grateful for all of you coming to this space and sharing. And I heard a lot of the same kind of themes of like just looking out for each other, being there for one another, connecting with one another, whether it be through a group or someone coming over and, you know, having coffee and tea and you getting to know them personally. And so I'm just, yeah, I'm grateful. It makes me feel good as a mother raising a little one in this community that I grew up in. And I honestly have to say, I am who I am today because of this community. This community is my chosen family in all of the ways. Everyone in my life, except for my son and one of my biological brothers and nephews, are my chosen family in this community. And I'm so grateful for that. And I know that so many of you feel the same way. And so, yeah, I just want to say thank you for sharing this space with us. We're gonna break and come back at 10:45. And I hope that we will see you then. Yeah.
Community Safety and Wellness Task Force. And this next session, Jennifer Carroll, who is one of our task force members, and I will be facilitating it. But we are so happy and glad to welcome and appreciative of, we have 3 wonderful presenters from cities who are already doing amazing alternative response work to help us begin to think about what it could look like here and to see real examples of how this work can be done and it should be done. So I'm very grateful that we are joined today by Moki from Atlanta CAD, by Carly from Denver.
Ryan, I apologize for interrupting you. We've had a request to repeat the instructions for simultaneous translation before we do introductions for everybody. May I ask someone from Tilde to help us with that one more time? Thank you very much.
Mike's here, sorry about that.
No problem, thank you.
So I will just explain very quickly to please remember for our presenters who might have just joined, please remember to speak slowly and clearly. We'll be interpreting simultaneously everything that you say and we don't want to miss anything. Also, please be sure to mute if you're not speaking. Un recordatorio para los que acaban de unirse, por favor, hablan de manera despacio y claramente no queremos perder nada en esta reunión de hoy. Y también, por favor, silenciar su micrófono cuando están hablando. Cuando no están hablando, disculpa. Y ahorita les explico cómo se une la interpretación, un recordatorio rápido. So just a quick reminder about how to get connected. And we are here with Tilde Language Justice Cooperative. My name's Emily, and we now have Andreina with us interpreting. If you join by phone, please make sure to use your Zoom application. Don't call in on the number line. Make sure to join by the Zoom application so that you can access the interpretation function and hear everything that's said in Spanish in English. And please also note that the function is not available on Chromebooks. Si usted quiere escuchar y participar en español, seleccione su canal de idioma haciendo clic abajo en la derecha de su pantalla en Zoom, en el icono del mundito si está usando una computadora o en los 3 puntitos si está conectado por teléfono. Seleccione interpretación, luego español, y luego picarle en done o listo si acaba de unirse y necesita otra vez escoger la interpretación. Un punto importante es que si ha llamado por un número telefónico no va a poder acceder a la interpretación y tampoco por Zoom. Entonces, si puede acceder a la reunión a través de la aplicación de Zoom en su teléfono inteligente, eso sería la mejor manera, o por su computadora. We will have participants speaking in Spanish today, so if you want to hear the interpretation in English, please make sure to select the language channel, your language channel in English, by going to the bottom right-hand corner of the Zoom screen. Click on the globe icon if you're using a computer, or on the 3 dots if you're connected by phone. Select interpretation, then English, and then click done at the end. And as I mentioned, please don't speak too fast. We want to make sure we interpret everything here in the meeting today. And if you have any issues, please just let us know by sending a message in the chat or activating your microphone. And thanks so much for having us here today. Si tienen cualquier problema, por favor, déjenos saber con decir algo en el chat o activar su micrófono. Gracias por tenernos aquí hoy.
Thank you so much for rolling with us gracefully when we put you on the spot like that. Hi, folks. My name is Jennifer. I'm a task force member. When I'm not interrupting Ryan, I'm relying on him and his amazing work at the Department of Community Safety and Wellness. Ryan, thank you so much. I'll turn it back to you to continue introductions.
No, thank you, Jennifer. And I just, let's all take a moment just to thank our amazing interpreters and Tilde Language Justice Co-op for creating a space that really centers language justice. We just really appreciate you for that work. So this is a really exciting time in Durham and across the country when we talk about reimagining what public safety can look like. And we are fortunate today to be joined by three amazing people whose organizations are doing amazing work right now in different communities across Durham. We're going to learn from Atlanta, from Denver, and from San Francisco as ways to help us begin to think about what this work could look like here and what lessons we can learn from communities who are already doing work and showing that this work can and should be done. So again, I'm very grateful for Moki, for Carly, and for Kathleen for taking time today to join us from the East Coast to the West Coast, and to our West Coast friends for joining very early. Thank you for that as well.
Yes.
We are going to start today with brief presentations from all three. But an hour of this time is really going to be focused on chances for you to ask questions, to share your thoughts about what really resonates with you that you would like to see here in Durham. We've asked each of our friends to provide up to a 10-minute presentation, and we're going to start on the East Coast and move west to give our friends further west a little more time to wake up and have a couple more sips of coffee. So Moki, we will start with you and with Atlanta CAD. And again, thank you so much for being with us today. And we look forward to a chance to learn and hear from you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this invitation. It's great to see some friends and some new faces on this call. I have a presentation that is maybe a little longer than 10 minutes. So I'm going to try and I might skip a few slides. But please know that I will share my presentation and that it is absolutely available to anybody who wants it, and I'm available for follow-up conversations. But just quickly by way of introduction, my name is Moki Macias. I'm the Executive Director for the Policing Alternatives and Diversion Initiative, more affectionately known as PAD. And yes, today representing the Southeast, I guess, and a sister city here in Atlanta. So I just appreciate the opportunity, and I'm really excited to hear from my colleagues from our other cities as well. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and jump right into it. Okay, can y'all see? Cool. All right. Awesome. So yeah, I'm here today mostly to focus on our work with the Atlanta 311 line, which is something that we started in January of this year. So I share this work that we're doing here in Atlanta as inspiration, as invitation to continue learning together. By no means have we figured this out, but we have spent the last 9 months or so learning with the community that we are serving and with our public partners to try and provide another option here in Atlanta. So this is just to note, this is a picture of one of our participants and one of our care navigators in front of an awesome mural here in Atlanta. So just for some framing about the problem, right? Our understanding is that current systems have failed our communities for a long time. And as a result of that failure, that lack of investment of resources, that lack of listening to communities about what they need, local and state governments have criminalized people's survival activities, right? So that has meant that police intervention and then subsequent detention has been the primary response to social issues, whether that's related to people's drug use, to people's mental health needs, and to people's experience of extreme poverty, often, which also includes people's experience of homelessness. And we know that this reliance on policing has caused great harm, and the burden has really been felt by the Black community and other folks of color across the country, as well as in Atlanta. We also know that this sort of cycle of arrest and incarceration does not address the actual concerns, right? That, it is sort of fed as the solution, but it is actually, we are simply hiding people and harming people. So what we are trying to do here with our public partners is to change the response to problematic substance use, to unmet mental health needs, and to extreme poverty. So that's kind of the lane that we're in. Just as a bit of a framing. At the same time, we're also advocating with colleagues in the field, as well as with membership organizations and with some of our partners inside of the public institutions, to actually create the resources that people need, right? The response is never going to be the solution. It's simply a different pathway to what people actually need. So we can never talk about what the response is without also considering where do people then access what they actually need, and where are the investments in those sorts of resources. So, we like to sort of talk about our work as a new approach to community safety and wellness. This is a recent picture of our team. We have grown exponentially over the last year and a half. In July 2020, we were a team of 11, and now we're a team of 35. And this includes a few of our founders and board members as well. But our work, just by context, was developed out of a campaign led by the Solutions Not Punishment Coalition, also known as SNAPCO, still an organization in Atlanta that is working around particularly lifting up Black trans leadership, and also addressing the issues of policing that particularly trans and gender nonconforming folks are experiencing here in the city. But the campaign led to the development of PAD. So just to be kind of clear about who we are, we're an independent nonprofit that is now receives public dollars as well as private dollars to achieve the following goals. North Star for us is to reduce arrest and incarceration of folks that are experiencing these kinds of concerns, right? Second is to increase the accessibility of the resources we know are the folks that we're working with and our communities really need. And then also to more effectively address community concerns, right? So what I think one thing that we've learned over the last 5 years is that it doesn't do us any good to minimize the concerns that people are calling the police for because they don't have other options, right? Or because that's kind of what they've been kind of trained to do, right? It doesn't do us any good to tell the small business owner, well, you shouldn't be concerned about the woman who has slept in front of your building and perhaps has used the bathroom right at the door and now is taking her clothes off. And I say that as a real example that we hear very often of people who are in a really hard position and that are surviving in public, right? And community members are concerned. Some express concern because they are concerned about the person in front of them. Others their lens may be more about, I'm concerned that nobody wants to walk into my business. But it doesn't do us any good to minimize those concerns. What we're trying to do is actually more effectively address the concerns and reduce the harm for everybody involved, right? So our strategies, this is a couple folks from our team, Jasmine and Stacy in the front are harm reduction, a couple of our harm reduction specialists who respond to calls, and then China in the back seat there is actually our referral manager. So she sort of helps, she vets the calls and then helps get our teams out. We've got 7 vans now that go out around town to respond to folks. We do have sort of 2 core strategies. One is, and the way we started was providing immediate alternative to arrest for folks who were already being detained by law enforcement. It's based on the law enforcement assisted diversion model. It is it relies on police officer discretion. We still provide that. We think it's an important option when somebody has already been detained. But what we are also doing now, and which I'm going to spend more time on, is our partnership with the City of Atlanta 311 line, where we provide either immediate or scheduled consent-based outreach to people who are referred. We also provide case management, or what we call care navigation, and direct resources like a place to stay, food support, food resources, transportation, cell phones, that sort of thing, just the direct supports that people may need right off the bat. And we're currently operating Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And that aligns with the hours that 311 is accepting calls through actual people answering the phone. So I'm not going to go too deeply into this, but I want to just note this here that we went through about a 6-month design process to develop this 311 partnership. So we looked at 911 call data. We held community listening sessions that were co-hosted with a real range of other organizations in town. We did a community survey, and then we really developed the protocol within these working groups, which had also a broad spectrum of people involved. So I just want to say a couple things about the 911 data that we looked at. We looked at about 3 million calls for service. And we found that Atlanta is very consistent with other cities in that, about 4 to 8% of the calls are for issues that you might think people call 911 for if you watch TV. But for the most part, the majority, the highest number of calls were for motor vehicle incidents. And then we identified about 18% of the calls that we thought could be potential for diversion or deflection. And I'm including those call codes here. The language that is used in those call codes is theirs, not ours. But I want to just, direct you to, suspicious person, for example, criminal trespass, public indecency, intoxicated person. All of these types of calls are, we know are often related to somebody who needs assistance or is surviving on the street. And also just recognizing that there is a large number of calls where people are kind of policing their own neighborhood. And certainly that's where we see, where racial bias in particular comes in. I want to talk a little bit about the source type. So when we looked at these 600,000 calls, we found that about 41% of them were actually coming through this random 7-digit number that we got that is on the police department website, right? And what we saw from that is that, those calls actually just get transferred right over to 911. I think that's just a capacity issue. And I say this because I think many other cities may have something similar. So I think it's worth looking at. But it was a big aha for us that of those, almost half of those 600,000 calls over 3 years, people were actually choosing a different number and then getting rerouted to 911, right? So people want something different, right? And then we also saw, that a large number of the calls were actually kind of self-reported through police calling in. So I think that's something to also look at when you're reviewing your police department data. And then the other thing just to note is that the vast majority of these calls that we had identified were designated sort of the lowest level response time, either a 20-minute or a 50-minute response. We also did a community survey. We tried to sort of put out there the types of concerns that often do result in a 911 call that kind of track with the kind of diversions we may get from law enforcement. I want to note here that, for the question of asking for money on the street, we found that, most people responding were saying, no, I wouldn't call 311 for that. But they were also saying, I wouldn't call 911 either. And I think that's just an important thing to understand when you have, when you have community members saying, well, why would anybody call anybody for somebody asking for money on the street? And then you see that, our code still criminalizes panhandling, and it provides up to 6-month incarceration penalty for it, or punishment for it. So just something to think about in terms of how you do your community engagement and what else that can lead to. We did community listening sessions. I have this here because I think it's important to just think about how to get folks in the room together that may not usually be in the room together, but really to be thinking through some of these issues, because there's sticky issues that come up with these kinds of innovations. And so, I think more than anything, our tack has been to be really transparent about that and to invite people into problem solving with us. Where we landed are these activities that can be referred through City of Atlanta. And, I can speak more to this later, but, we tried to sort of capture activities that are currently criminalized without furthering that criminalization through our language, right? So we tried to be pretty specific about the types of concerns people could call in for. 311 worked with us very closely. We've had an awesome partner in them. They set up their own dedicated supportive services delivery team, something that wasn't in place before our partnership with them. And so they have the ability to reroute to other lines, right? They already had the ability to reroute to 911 if needed. That has happened in a few cases, particularly really to medical emergencies when the person who's called, identifies that actually it's probably a medical emergency. They can also reroute requests to United Way. They can reroute for mobile crisis support, peer warm lines. So they're kind of triaging these calls. And then when it comes to, this really needs an in-person response, that's when we get the call. Just a quick snapshot of what we've done over the last 9 months or so. We've received 747 requests, 679 of them being unique calls. The majority were people referring someone else for assistance. For the ones that we identified as this needs an immediate response, otherwise it may escalate to police involvement. We have an average response time of 18 minutes. And then for those that felt like, it seemed, but we could certainly offer support, but it doesn't seem like this situation is going to escalate immediately. It seems like this person may be in the area, that may be their home, that we try and respond to within 3 days. So a three-day window. And then we also provided phone support over the phone, support over the phone, I should say. And that often involves community members who, they're calling because their loved one has just been arrested. They're calling because their loved one is dealing with a mental health issue. And they just need some support figuring out what to do next. I don't want to miss saying what our approach is. This is Mr. Larry, who is one of our participants, who was featured in the front of the presentation. And he actually is in our video, our training video that we provide to the police department. He speaks about his experience. And what he talks about is that, it's our approach that made a difference for him, was that it is absolutely choice-based, that his care navigator worked with him to identify what he wanted and needed, and that there was no program requirements, right? That it really is about trying to support people where they're at and figure out what they need, and what their definition of stability and thriving is. We've received a lot of community support for this innovation. I think there's, we've really heard from community members that they have been waiting for this. And I think that there has been a real benefit in having a line that people already know, a public line as well, but that is designated as non-emergency, because we're starting to try and see a culture, to sort of spark a culture shift, I should say, to help people identify what is actually an emergency and what is actually something that is a need they need assistance with, but is not necessarily, should not require a police response or other emergency response as much as just a caring and kind, quick response, right? Okay, I might have gone over time. I apologize. And these are a few more members of our team.
Thank you so much. I'll ask individuals, just encourage you to, if you have questions as we're going, chat them in and we'll come back to them. But we're going to go ahead now. Jennifer, you're good with that? Go ahead and hear from Denver now.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Carly, thank you very much.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me today. My name is Carly Salon. I'm a clinical social worker and an addiction counselor here in Denver. I work for Denver 911 as the support team assisted response operations manager, but I have a long history working in community mental health and developing and staffing our pilot program. So I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about STAR today. I will get my screen share going and let me know if that's popping up for everyone. Okay, great. So yeah, I want to talk to you a little bit about STAR, Support Team Assisted Response, and a little background information. We've been running a co-responder program here in Denver since 2016 that pairs licensed mental health clinicians with Denver police officers to respond to high risk, high acuity 911 calls. And what happens when you give a bunch of...
Would you mind just slowing down for the interpreters and
Sorry.
for all of us, because what you're sharing is so special and important.
I'm originally from New York, so I have 2 speeds of speech, fast and really fast. So thanks for that reminder.
Representing Texas, I'm the same way. So thank you very much.
So we pair licensed mental health clinicians with Denver police officers in our co-responder program. And what happens when you give a bunch of social workers police radios is they recognize that a lot of the issues coming through the 911 and emergency communication system do not need the traditional 3 responses of fire, ambulance, or police. So we started thinking about what we could add as far as response options here in Denver, and really look to Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon to model our pilot program. So we pair a licensed mental health clinician with a paramedic or EMT to respond to low risk, low acuity 911 calls coming in through the system. So we're really looking, same as Atlanta, at these quality of life issues, social determinants issues, resource needs, and where people are calling for assistance or are in need and don't need those traditional emergency responses. So when we started our pilot program, we also held, community meetings. We brought together different representatives, stakeholders, people with lived experience, lots of individuals to sort of shape what this pilot would look like for Denver. And what we settled on initially was that we had this set of 7 nature codes that indicated that someone was in need, but the issues didn't necessarily pose a safety risk to the responders. So similar to Atlanta, welfare check, assist, intoxicated person, syringe disposal, trespass. We have a large unhoused population in downtown Denver. And due to that area being significantly developed with a lot of high-priced housing over the past couple of years, this has led to an increase in 911 and non-emergency calls regarding members of our unhoused community. So we're also looking at adding public drug use and some disturbance calls to these nature codes as we work on citywide expansion. We've been running our pilot program since June 1st of 2020, Monday through Friday, 10 to 6, focusing mainly in our downtown area. So looking at our assignment mechanism, our 911 call takers are all trained to triage the most appropriate response, whether that be fire, police, ambulance, a co-responder team with our police department, or STAR. So even if you don't know to ask for STAR, you don't know what STAR is, all of our call takers, in the 911 communication center are trained to flag a STAR response if appropriate. And this accounted for about 41% of calls for service. We also get a significant number of calls for service that are requests from police officers, where they've shown up on scene first for whatever reason, recognize that this wasn't a police issue, and have radioed for STAR to come take over the call. This also happens quite a bit with ambulances who show up and recognize that the individual doesn't need ambulance transport to the ER. So really looking at bringing the right response to the community of Denver, also using these, the STAR resource as a force multiplier for ambulance and police so that they can hand these calls over to us and deal with more significant law enforcement or medical emergencies. And then STAR also does a good bit of self-initiated response in the field. So, we see someone sitting on a curb crying, we'll hold ourselves out and go contact them. see someone having a big behavior outside of Starbucks downtown, we'll stop and try to prevent that call. The best 911 call is the type that doesn't happen and that STAR can just handle. And similar to Atlanta, really focusing on client-centered treatment, harm reduction, really tailoring our approach to the stage of change that someone is in. We are there to support you no matter what stage you're at, provide you with referrals, resources, or just, give you some harm reduction strategies to be safe and healthy if you're not really looking to make a change that day. So here's some data from, June 1st of 2020 until now. So we've run 1,780 calls for service without ever needing to call police for backup due to a safety issue. We're most frequently responding to things like welfare check, trespass, assist calls, individuals who are experiencing suicidal ideation who may not be an imminent risk and really just need someone to go contact them and talk to them and offer them some support in that moment. And then you can see on the little multicolored chart, our STAR assigned calls for service. Most people think that our busiest times would be nights and weekends. It's actually weekdays during business hours. This is when business owners are calling on members of our unhoused community for sleeping in a doorway or outside of their business. Commuters are out going to work now that COVID's eased up a bit around here and are calling on folks that they're observing. So really focusing on running a very data-driven program and putting resources where we need them most. And what we're doing here in Denver is really looking at creating a new pathway for 911 calls for service. We've traditionally had criminal justice, fire and medical, and then this whole other category of calls that doesn't really fit into those two pathways. So looking at providing, connection to trauma-informed, supportive mental health and substance misuse resources through our 911 communication system, and really responding to the needs of the community. Taking police, fire, and ambulance out of issues that they were really never intended for in the first place, and have sort of been, calls have been routed there because of a lack of a better option. Oops. So we're currently working on citywide expansion, looking at diverting about 10,000 calls a year that could have been that would have traditionally been dispatched to fire, police, or ambulance. So, again, focusing on data, equitable response throughout the city. We hoped at the end of the year, I'm running into some supply issues due to COVID, but we're problem solving around that. But we'll be growing from 1 to 4 vans, 1 to 6 teams. We'll be running 7 days a week from the hours of 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And serving the entire city of Denver using an EMS style dispatch where vans are not tied to a certain geographic location, but are sent where they are needed. So that is the end of my presentation. I hope I slowed it down. Sorry about that.
Thank you so much, Carly. Now we'll go on to hear from our final guest from San Francisco Street Crisis Response Team. Kathleen, thank you so much for being with us today.
Good morning, y'all. I am Kathleen Silk. I'm happy to join you all from San Francisco this morning. My pronouns are she, her. And I am the director of the Street Crisis Response Team here in San Francisco with our Department of Public Health. Let me see, I want to go ahead and make this full screen. Well, I'm not going to be able to do that while I'm sharing. Okay, I hope you all can see. So I have a quick overview of our program, and I also am going to give you all the link to our website, and I'm also happy to make myself available. I think it's really exciting that we have so many cities like Durham and like Denver and Atlanta that we are all doing similar work and very trauma-informed and responsive work in all of our cities. So I'm excited that we can have this conversation this morning. So in San Francisco, we have developed the Street Crisis Response Team. We launched in November of 2020. Just very quick background. In San Francisco, we have a board of supervisors who approved a sort of total renovation of our behavioral health system called Mental Health SF. That legislation was passed in 2019, and it, among other initiatives, very explicitly called out the need for a street crisis response team, which was described as a behavioral health team responding to calls for service for people suffering on the street, experiencing distress and behavioral health crises on the street. Our mayor, London Breed, also has repeatedly expressed commitment to this, but especially in the summer of 2020 regarding police reform, and this fitting in very closely with other issues related to police reform in our city. Similar to my other presenters that I'm joining this morning, we based our model on several across the country. While the idea of mobile crisis and trauma-informed response to behavioral health crises is nothing new. Like I said, I think it's really wonderful that each city is looking at new ways we can do this to divert police from police response. We also based ours on Cahoots in Eugene, as well as models in Atlanta, Dallas, Arizona, and our neighbors across the Bay, Alameda, California. So the Street Crisis Response Team is also, so our main goal is to provide rapid trauma-informed response to calls for service to people experiencing crisis in public spaces in order to reduce law enforcement encounters and unnecessary emergency room use. So in addition to the harms that my colleagues have enumerated that can result in flash incarceration or even just contact with law enforcement, we also see, especially during the pandemic, what the overuse of emergency rooms can do for people who use substances and who are otherwise living on the street. So the way our team, our Street Crisis Response Team works is that people call 911. Two sort of unique things that we like to highlight about the San Francisco model is that we do go through 911, although we have a 415 number in the works, because we have also since inception understood that 911 is not the only avenue that people are looking for help and are comfortable requesting help in situations like this. But going through 911, I will say, also has some advantages in that we are able to cast a pretty wide net and very directly divert from law enforcement response. So we identify 911 calls and that receive a behavioral health or medical response rather than law enforcement. Our teams deliver therapeutic de-escalation on scene and medically appropriate response. So we have a paramedic, we have a behavioral health clinician who is trained, their discipline is in mental health counseling or psychology, as well as, and the second piece that I always really like to highlight that is very San Francisco, is that we have someone who's, we call a peer counselor on our team. This trio, I call them the sort of holy trinity of the SCRT team. They are, every single one of them plays such a crucial role. So our paramedic is obviously there to be able to assess any urgent medical issues. We do identify a lot of chronic health conditions and are able to address some of that in the moment. And we're really happy to be able to do that. We also can connect people to immediate or ongoing care. If, let's say, there's unmanaged blood pressure or blood sugar or something, potentially a major medical condition that they could receive treatment for. Our behavioral health clinician is there to offer the clinical assessment, certainly look out for what would be the most trauma-informed response, as well as when needed, place an involuntary hold, if someone is presenting as gravely disabled or an immediate danger to themselves. I will note that that is a very small portion of the folks that we encounter, as our de-escalation model is showing that most crises can be resolved where they are. And finally, our peer counselor, which is just an incredibly important role. This is somebody who has come to this work self-identified as someone who has experienced behavioral health crises themselves, been the recipient of services, crisis services or other services, helping them recover from mental illness, substance use disorder, other issues, They identify in recovery and have received training on sort of how to make meaning and utilize their own lived experience to bring to the work as a peer counselor. And finally, the third component of our team is that once the crisis is de-escalated, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that can look like and the outcomes of that, we have a separate team, which we call our Street Crisis Response Team Office of Coordinated Care, that follows up with people in the next day. We follow up on 100% of people who end up being transported to the hospital, whether that is for an involuntary hold, or that is for, let's say, wound care, or they end up in the emergency room because of blood pressure. Our OCC team follows up 100% with those folks to ensure that there is smooth discharge planning from the hospital and that we are helping with whatever led them to that placement. We also follow up with most other encounters. We do want to respect people's autonomy and their preferences. So if people are very adamant that they do not want to be followed up with, we will not do that. But the follow-up care can look like linkages to already established care. Maybe they have a case manager they just haven't seen in a minute. Maybe they have a doctor that they have to refill meds with, or they might even have a family member that they have been wanting to get in touch with and cannot. We also help people get connected to mobile phones, clothing, certainly warm food, water, all of that, which we also provide during de-escalation. But it really, like I said, any opportunity for engagement, we consider health engagement. And so whatever the needs are, that's where we go. A little bit more. So as I mentioned, we respond to 911 calls. So currently we go through police dispatch. And so these are diverting calls that would otherwise be responded to by law enforcement. And they are 800 codes. So our classification is very old and very stigmatizing language that is a mentally disturbed person, but that is the code, and it's B priority level. And so basically what this means is someone in distress, an adult, and no weapon or violence has been identified. So those are the codes that we're currently using. We are looking to switch to a different part of our dispatch, which is a whole other conversation, but would cast an even wider net in removing law enforcement responses to these types of crises. We also do, which I think the other teams mentioned, are on views, which is that our teams also between 911 dispatch calls are in the communities looking for folks that they can help out. So these might be people who just are in obvious distress. Maybe they're out unclothed. Maybe they are screaming, crying, visible suffering, visible distress, or they are somebody that is known to us and we can tell what a crisis might look like for them. And so those are also a big part of what we do, which is, and I think it's also a big part of community building to be able to sort of be going around and catching some of this. We are, as I mentioned, moving as well to a 415 number to be able to access folks who want to make the call but are not comfortable calling 911. I mentioned our team staffing is a community paramedic. And so that is, by the way, that is a paramedic who is employed through the San Francisco Fire Department and has special training on community issues. And so they are very well versed in behavioral health as well as medical. We have a behavioral health clinician. That person is employed by a community organization called Health Right 360. When forming Street Crisis Response Team, I work for the Department of Public Health, and this is an initiative through the Department of Public Health, which is a government entity. We also wanted this program to be rooted in the community and responsive to the needs of the community. And so we very intentionally staffed it with 2 community organizations that are already very well established in providing behavioral health care. So that's Health Right 360 for the behavioral health clinician, and Richmond Area Multi-Services, also known as RAMS, for the peer health worker. Finally, our OCC team is also a multidisciplinary team. So we have health workers and people with lived experience, as well as behavioral health clinicians doing the follow-up. And to be clear, the follow-up after the de-escalation encounter, those folks are also going out into the field. So a lot of people don't have phones, or maybe they are not always in the same place. We are very proactive about meeting people where they are at. The vehicle that we use is a fire department vehicle. It is looks like a sort of sprinter van and identifies itself as the Street Crisis Response Team. There are no sirens. It's very easily identifiable. And we are able to transport people to voluntary treatment locations. So if someone is with us, and the part of the de-escalation might be getting them to a shelter, or we have a multitude of sort of acute care facilities in San Francisco where someone can just spend a couple days and decompress or even detox, those types of things. We can also transport people to a place, like I said, if they have an appointment or a drop-in center that they haven't been to in a while and need to get connected back to, we can help them, we can drop them at all of those places. For hospital transport, because of COVID in San Francisco, we do not transport directly to the hospital, so we do work with our emergency medical response to do that. And finally, a big piece of what we do is also community engagement and feedback. So this is multi-layered and ongoing, and this is day-to-day, but this is also quarterly meetings where we receive feedback, where we get updated, very generous and very honest feedback about how things are going in the community and what we can improve on as a pilot. I mentioned that we're in the first 10 months of our pilot, and while we're really proud of how far we've come, this work is ever changing. With trauma-informed work, we also just want to make sure that we are always responsive to the community. And so that is a huge piece. Between calls, when the rigs are not in service or responding to a call, they're also meeting with neighbors, other organizations, people who live in the communities that they serve, and building relationships and knowledge so that they understand. Also getting the word out that there is a new response when you call 911 for certain calls, and that giving enough details can enable our team to be dispatched. And I think that's a big piece when considering these, is the sort of public messaging around how to reach a team like this. Just briefly, this is our map, and it kind of can give you also an idea of how teams were launched. We are also very data driven and based our teams. We have 6 total teams, and we base the launch times on the call volume. The exception to that is in our Bayview neighborhood. So you can see that in our Tenderloin neighborhood, they have far and away the most calls for service for this type of thing, followed very closely by our Mission Castro neighborhoods. The Bayview was the 3rd team that we launched, and the Bayview does not have the 3rd most calls for service. But this has also been traditionally a very underserved part of the city, where we know that there are established barriers to calling 911, but there is no less need for behavioral health crises intervention. So we prioritize the Bayview and Excelsior and Visitation Valley neighborhood, this green southeast corner of our city, as the 3rd team to launch. Our last team to launch, and we're happy at this point in our pilot to be 24/7. As I mentioned, we do not co-respond with police. And so when these calls fit our criteria, we are out there responding. And so to be 24/7 is incredibly important to our objective of diverting 100% of these calls away from law enforcement. And our team 6 overnight, the call volume tends to be lower because most people are sleeping, but there's definitely a lot of folks up. But we have found that one team covering our 7x7 city overnight has been adequate. This is all, though, driven by what the sort of changing needs are. So if that data starts to show that we need more than one team overnight, we're hoping that our city will support us with the budget to be able to do that. So far that we are budgeted, and that looks like it would be fine on the horizon, but we also just want to make sure that we're scheduling teams where the calls are. So we do have the mayor's budget last year included a team 7 for street crisis response team, and we are working now to look at where the calls are happening and where we need that 7th team. Tentatively, it looks like the early and late evening is where we're going to need to place those folks. I mentioned data. Data is really important. I think this work involves certainly numbers in terms of data, but also the stories behind what the impact of this is and what brought us here. We have 2 different studies for our street crisis response team that are underway. And these are both quantitative and qualitative data studies that we're hoping to look at and learn from and help grow our program. In the meantime, we also publish a public data dashboard every month which shows the results of our calls, our call time. I'm happy to say that, in terms of being a rapid response, our average call time right now is 15 minutes. We're hoping that will actually become even less when we have more teams on the ground. And as we fortify the ones that have just rolled out. But very briefly, most of our crises are resolved in the community. So 63% of our neighbors are remaining in the community. This can sometimes be a data point that is hard for some people to understand as a success, but we consider it a huge one for us. Street Crisis Response Team is the scope of our work is really to help de-escalate what's going on in the moment and also help people to then participate in the way that they want to participate in our community. These are our neighbors, these are our friends and our family. A lot of these folks, most of the people that we serve are unhoused, and they are still nonetheless part of our community, and they are taken care of by our community. And so we, if someone is in crisis and the Street Crisis Response Team responds them, we are looking to do whatever we can to return to sort of baseline and help them move forward in whatever way that they feel comfortable with and is helping engage them in their own health. So we do follow up with our Office of Coordinated Care. We also sometimes have people that we see more than once, and every single time, if the first time somebody engages street crisis and is like, I'm not really sure what you guys are doing, the crisis is de-escalated, and let's say they accept a bottle of water and a pair of socks, we do consider that a success. We know that we have built trust for that person. We know that a clean pair of socks can go a long way toward that person's health. We also know that hydration can go as far as being something that can prevent death by overdose, which is a huge issue in San Francisco for us right now. But the next time we encounter that person, we are hoping that that trust is still there, and we are able to potentially engage them even further. So if there is someone that they haven't talked to in a long time, or they used to live in a different part of the city that they'd like to get to, that Street Crisis can be a resource for that. And eventually leading up to, if they want to engage in treatment, to engage in other health resources. There have been no violence or calls for arrest on SCRT calls. So we don't correspond with police. If things become escalated, such as a weapon being identified or violence starting, we do sometimes have to call for law enforcement backup. That is less than 2% of our calls, and none of those have resulted in violence or an arrest of the person that we are encountering. And we're really happy with that. And I think ultimately when we talk about the reasonings behind these types of initiatives, that's the proof in the pudding right there. And I'm really happy to show that to you all today. I mentioned this already, very low percentage of people require an involuntary hold. In California, that's known as a 5150, 7% of our encounters. And the clients served by SCRT, this is on our data dashboard as well, very diverse in race, ethnicity, age, and gender. Obtaining someone's demographics in the midst of a crisis can feel very invasive and can be hard to obtain. And also we consider that data point an incredibly important piece of advocacy in our equity work. And so we do focus on that and figure out ways that we can improve our program and build our program around the needs of those who we actually serve, not who we think we're serving. And that's where that data, I think, really comes in. Here's a little picture of one of our teams. This is our Mission Castro team on Pride back in June. And so this is one of our vans as well. I've got a link to our website where we publish our data and have more information about our program. And I know we didn't have a ton of time to talk today, but I do appreciate the time that you've given me, and I'm happy to be here for more questions or whatever else.
Thank you all for each of those inspiring examples. And I know that we have a lot of questions coming through in the chat. One thing for those in attendance, we will share out these slides as a follow-up if you've given us your email. We want to prioritize the rest of our time to hear from you. We want to do that in two ways. The first way is we want to offer an interactive way for you to share the things that you heard that you really liked, an element, some part of a program, something that you'd like to see us think about how we could do here. We're going to do that through a technology-assisted way that is a platform called Menti. Shannon has added it in the chat. You can do this through your cell phone. You could do it by opening up another window in your browser, and you would type in www.menti.com. And then there, when you go to that screen, you will see asking you to enter a 8-digit number. And that number, which is in the chat, I'm also going to read out. It is 91358880. And what Menti is going to allow us to do is, while we're going through a question and answer, we would like you to you can write in or type in anything that stood out to you that you really liked, anything that is a piece of inspiration, something that you hope we might figure out how to do here. Is this a place of saying yes and to things that you heard today? And so that's going to be running in the background. So please use that. If you cannot access Menti, use the chat. That's fine too. And you can chat in, I like this. But Menti will do some nice things for us at the end if you can. Try that out. And then we're going to come back to that. So that is just an open way. Not everyone feels comfortable talking, but hopefully everyone can feel comfortable using the various tools we provided today to share something that you heard that you liked. And I think now we're going to pivot towards some question and answers. And I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ryan. I wanted to address first a question that was actually posed to the members of the roundtable, which is how did we select partner cities to share their research with us today? And I will say this is something we talked about for quite a while. And what I can share is that we were prioritizing a few things. One is cities that already have programs in operation, so they can talk about what their experience has been actually getting design completed, pilots off the ground, implementation underway, community feedback, and kind of test out their models and learn through experience. There's plenty of other cities who are having conversations just like the one that we're having today, who are still at the stage that we are. So we wanted to work with folks and learn from folks who are actually out there doing the work a little bit ahead of us in this process. We also were interested in selecting cities that share I think that represent a diversity of I'll call it workforces doing this. There's also been a lot of conversations both within our task force and within the larger scholarly, activist, organizational leadership communities about how to think through the problems of, so first of all, if we're going to think about police alternatives, to what exactly, to what sort of need, to what sort of crisis, to what sort of service that might be needed. And then once we do that, asking the question of, do we want to think about staffing these new roles in terms of existing professional categories, right? Should we be asking ourselves, should it be certified mental health practitioners or recovery counselors or EMTs, or should we be thinking about this in a skills-based way? Do we want folks who have lived experience? Do we want folks who have been through de-escalation training? Do we want folks who have motivational interviewing expertise, things of that nature? So the cities that were invited here today, we believe do a good job of representing the gamut of sending out social workers, making sure that peers are on the team, addressing different kinds of calls, approaching the problem a little bit differently to kind of give us a variety of what's happening on the ground. So the first question that came in was actually directed for our friends in Denver. And there was a follow-up question related to Durham that I don't know the answer to, but if someone who is on our Community Safety Wellness Department staff is able to answer the follow-up question, I would be very grateful if you could pop in. The question for Denver was whether it says our 911 operators are certified and our agency is accredited. Does Denver's training meet those national standards, or have you developed them locally? And then the follow-up question for anyone from the department who may be able to answer is the training and certification across the Durham 911 and the Sheriff 911 call centers consistent?
Yeah, sure. So we do meet national standards at our 911 communication center. And in terms of STAR, what we've done is create processing guides that select those original set of 7 nature codes that we're working on expanding currently, and give kind of a step-by-step guide as to what would be appropriate for traditional police response, what would be appropriate for a co-responder team, and what would be appropriate for STAR. And I think it's important to note that our call taking procedures didn't change at all. in terms of STAR. So our call takers are still asking the same questions that they would when someone calls 911 for any issue. Is there a weapon? Is anybody injured or hurt? Is there any sort of crime committed or a need for emergency lights and sirens response? Those are all typical 911 questions that are used to triage any issue. So if all of the answers to those questions are no, then our call takers know, all right, is this something that we could be sending STAR to instead?
I'm not sure if anyone from emergency communications for the city is on this call. It's not a question that I can answer right off the top of my head, but it's one that we could get an answer for and reply back.
Thank you, Ryan. Our next question is said, assuming that these pilots have revealed gaps in needed follow-up services for referred individuals, which I think is probably a safe assumption across the board, for all of the folks who shared with us today, have you been able to advocate with city or counties to bolster the resources that you need to link people to once they're receiving crisis services from you, and what have the results of those efforts been so far? I'll let anyone who would like to answer the question first unmute themselves.
I can pop in here. It's Moki. I think that has been an important consideration for us from the beginning, from when we were doing law enforcement diversion as well. I think we have certainly been able to join a lot of tables and kind of been a credible messenger, if you will, in some of those spaces. So that includes our county justice and mental health task force, which includes our Department of Behavioral Health. We've also gotten to work much more closely with the housing continuum of care, as well as now the State Department of Behavioral Health. So we definitely are trying to kind of keep banging that drum. We have been able to receive more resources as a result, dedicated towards, particularly, we're actually working on a partnership right now with the State Department of Behavioral Health and our local continuum of care that will provide both dedicated vouchers for folks who are experiencing homelessness and also supportive services for folks that we're able to place. So I think that has been a key part of the strategy, is just continuing to say, especially for so many of the calls are related to people experiencing homelessness, and the solution to homelessness is housing. So it's a critical piece of the resources.
A super quick follow-up, Moki, are you finding that these other agencies, Department of Behavioral Health, local city councils, whoever might be in a position to support these services, do you find that they have the bandwidth to connect these dots and make these improvements? Or is this something that PAD has had to really take the lead on in terms of driving initiative to make those changes?
I think there is a lot of the challenge is that the city is responsible for enforcement and the county and the state are responsible for behavioral health care. And so there can kind of be some finger pointing, right? And I think we have been instrumental in making that point over and over again in those spaces. So, where we can show up to tables that are already existing, we have, but we've also invited people into conversations together to try and connect those dots.
Thank you. And would either of our other presenters like to address the question of have you identified gaps in services and or been able to advocate for improving that situation locally?
I'm happy to step in and give sort of a really specific answer to that. So yes, and I would say that I think when we make such a large shift from a system, it's really important to get buy-in from as a sort of system of care, and there's a lot of moving parts to that. So in San Francisco, for years now, we have been really focused on providing more harm reduction services as well as low barrier options for people who experience, especially substance use disorder. This in the same way that we have sort of built systems around law enforcement responding to these crises, we really have to invest as a community in building systems around diverting them. And that really does include this very crucial piece of the 24 hours following a crisis, what options are available to people. So through the Department of Public Health, that is my employer, but also through a lot of community-based organizations, more than half of our behavioral health services in San Francisco are contracted through nonprofits and other community-based organizations. And we have a very rich history of offering some low barrier services, but even more have been opening up. Another piece of the mental health SF legislation that is in conjunction with the street crisis is a 24-hour drop-in center for people who are intoxicated on methamphetamines and other drugs, what we're calling a drug crisis response center. And this is essentially a safe place for someone to go when they are intoxicated. It isn't a longer-term detox. It is a very harm reduction model that also has people, peers, and other folks who can welcome people in a non-judgmental harm reduction space. But things like that are incredibly crucial because homelessness is a huge problem in San Francisco, and the need for a bed is a very complicated one. We do partner with shelters, we partner with longer term housing, and that can resolve a lot of problems for people. And also for people who have been living outside and who are very suspicious of some resources offered to them, immediately being able to provide them with something really low barrier and welcoming, even if just to do a load of laundry or to have a hot meal or to sit on a couch with somebody who will listen to them or understand them, or they are indoors and it is not raining, can be huge. And it can be huge to the immediate impacts and trauma responses that accompany a behavioral health crisis. So the low barrier services immediately following a crisis are still a need in San Francisco, but we have started, and I think because SCRT has been launched and there's been a positive community response to it, a lot of people saying, oh, we've needed this. We go back and turn and say, that's wonderful. We are here for that. We also agree it's needed. In order to do what we do, we need the following, and we need these low barrier services, and we need this next 24 hours to matter. This also helps impact things like emergency room use and other things when people just have somewhere to go. So I would really encourage any city considering something like this to look at it as a system-wide initiative. And like I said, in the same way we've built structures around how we utilize police and other law enforcement to address these crises, how can we now change that and build a system around a different response and a more trauma-informed and culturally responsive system?
I'll hop in quickly as well. I mean, just to dovetail on what Kathleen said, I really see these programs as sort of a two-prong effort. There's that team that shows up on the van that provides support, mitigates whatever issue or crisis people are dealing with in that moment. And then, you know, a very important part is the network of community services that you're able to refer to. Otherwise, people continue to cycle in and out of crisis. And we are looking at doing a pretty robust third-party evaluation for STAR citywide expansion to help us identify those gaps in a more data-driven way, looking at not just the crisis interaction point, but then what happened once we connected folks, and how was that treatment or program the right fit? Were they able to remain engaged? Did it help them with whatever they were, you know, looking to address? And using that information to then address larger system gaps versus just my anecdotal experience of what I've, you know, kind of bumped up against in the community.
Thank you all very much. So we are doing our best to collect the questions that are coming into the chat into a particular stack. In the interest of time, I'm going to try to combine a couple of the questions. One is largely about stakeholders. So Kathleen, the question was posed to you: has the Department of Public Health been involved from the beginning? And in general, what strategies might our presenters recommend for getting other stakeholders on board, including but not limited to public safety and law enforcement?
Great question. I will answer the first part to say yes, this is an initiative that was started by the Department of Public Health in San Francisco. So we have been on board the entire time. The contractors went through an RFP process and came on that way, but the Department of Public Health and then almost immediately the fire department, community paramedic division was on board. In terms of stakeholders and getting people on board, I mean, I think a few things, and I will also note that like every city has its culture and every city has its history. And so I don't know how well I could speak to others, but I will say that in San Francisco, it really, really helped that our mayor was very explicit in her support for an initiative like this. It was very helpful that our Board of Supervisors was explicitly calling this out in the mental health SF legislation. Those things can go a long way. And our experience, the San Francisco Police Department and the San Francisco County Sheriff, those are city and county departments, just like the Department of Public Health, and they have been very collegial with us. And we in San Francisco do also have a community policing division and other folks that the Department of Public Health had already been coordinating on other initiatives, ways to divert from incarceration when the main issue is a behavioral one, or a behavioral health issue or an underlying health issue, period. And so I think that a few things that really help get buy-in are data, that this isn't just sort of finger wagging or saying, we don't think this works. Really being able to say, let's look at where this is working. Let's look at where this is not working. And that goes also to any team that sets itself up. I think it's really good to be open to the feedback of, you're not taking enough of the calls, or you said that you were going to focus on this area of the city. We're still really struggling. What can we do? And being open to that feedback on how to widen your own impact. But those conversations are hard. I think, for law enforcement, there is this larger conversation nationwide, and that can have impacts in a lot of different ways on how these relationships are built. But I think transparency and data are incredibly important. I think it's also creating forums and places to continue to be able to talk with anyone who is working in the community. So that may go for law enforcement, but it certainly also goes for other established providers. We have a couple other different crisis providers in San Francisco that have been doing the work for a while. And there is no reason to reinvent the wheel, but also it's really important to respect history and what people have already built and make sure that these things are sort of meshing together. Doing presentations like the one I was invited to do with you all today also helps getting the word out. I meet with people from small community groups for like tiny neighborhoods. I did one yesterday for our Outer Sunset. There were about 9 people on that call. I give them the same information and make myself just as available to them as I would for a large city like Durham. I think being really hands-on and having people know that they can talk and give feedback and having that transparency. We also equip our teams in the field with a flyer and also sort of talking points on what SCRT does and how to collaborate and how to access SCRT. I mentioned that access is a big question, and that piece of community communication of sort of public relations of how do you reach us is huge, because people do get confused about what 911 is used for. There's the larger national 988 process that's also underway. Where does this fit in with that? We've had a 311 number for a long time. You can't reach us through 311. It being really clear about these things, having written material. We have about 5 threshold languages in San Francisco. We make sure that they're all in those languages. We have people on our team who speak multiple languages, and that's incredibly important for access as well. So I think it's multi-layered. I think it's dependent on existing relationships as well as new ones that you want to forge. But transparency and data, I think, would be the biggest things that we utilize for getting the word out.
Thank you. So I'm again, for the interest of time and getting everyone's questions answered, combining a few. we have some questions about logistics of these programs. So one, how are people able to get a hold of you? Are there text options? Is it phone numbers? Are they all calling? I mean, some of this was answered in the presentation, but if there is not an option to be rerouted to you from 911, how have you raised community awareness about alternative numbers like 311? And then on the dispatch side, what sort of processes are in place to make sure that the right team is respond to dispatch the right unit to each call, if there might be safety concerns, child welfare concerns, is it every single 800 code? How are people finding you, and then how are you like diagnosing the calls and sending people out? If you have any insight on like tips, anything that you would have told your past self a year ago as you were designing these programs, we'd love to hear any insight on that.
So here in Denver, you can access STAR by calling 911, our police non-emergency line, or we have a dedicated STAR line, 720-913-STAR. They're all answered in our 911 communication center by the same individuals. Important to note that our 911 communication center is a civilian unit. So it's trained civilians answering those phones, not police or badged individuals. Recognizing that just calling the 911 communication center creates barriers for some individuals in some communities. I've talked to a lot of partners across the country that run similar programs to see what other options we could, put in to address those barriers. I think we do not at this time have a direct, number to the STAR team. My concern is that folks will fall through the cracks because of voicemails that go unanswered because, staff are off of their shifts for a couple days. Or not being able to answer the phone because they're on a call. So kind of working around that. Haven't figured out the answer yet. Again, our processing guide helps our civilian call takers determine what the best response is. If there is a safety or risk concern, we can send our co-responders to get that clinical perspective on scene. But again, really looking at if there's a weapon, if there's violence, if there's an injury, if those circumstances are not the case, then looking at sending STAR.
I'd like to add a few thoughts on this as well. I appreciate all the various ways folks can get to y'all in Denver. Hopefully we'll get there in Atlanta, but for us, we are in conversations with our 911 system which is based out of our police department about transferring calls from 911 to 311. And I don't know if that's the right answer, but it is something that we are tossing around because particularly for a call code such as public indecency, right? We know that, if we can identify some codes that we feel pretty comfortable are appropriate calls for us, that it kind of keeps it within the public system, but it starts sort of redirecting those 911 callers to start using a different option. So it might be clunky for people who are calling to kind of go to 911 and then go to 311, but we're thinking that might also be just sort of an interesting feedback loop for those callers to say like, hey, actually, you don't need to call 911 for this. We've definitely heard concerns about confusing people, having too many numbers, et cetera. But I think that, we can trust that people are trying to make the best decision and that if we just give them continued information, they're going to figure out how to do that. I want to note here, since nobody's brought it up yet, but 988 and the planning that is being done around the 988 line, I think is something that we are all need to sort of consider. And then the other piece is just around, I think it's really important that these are public lines, and for us, that has been a priority, that it's not a separate number, but that it is a sort of baked into the public infrastructure so that we can keep changing our public infrastructure, right? Like these lines are our lines because we're the people, right, that pay for them and that use them. And so so I think that that's just an important point to note. We don't do text messaging to 311, although that is a possibility through our 311 system. People ask for it all the time. Our response to that is that people aren't potholes. You know, we do not want to get into a dynamic where folks are taking pictures of people and sending it in as sort of like, get rid of this person. We really think it's important for there to be a live conversation to kind of, to also just ask the person like, okay, so what do you think is going on? What have you done already, right? Like there's a culture change component that we want to bake in, and that we do a lot of coaching with our City of Atlanta call takers around how to just engage in some of these conversations with people and how to reframe some of what they're calling about. The other thing I wanted to mention, I'm going to put 3 different links in the chat, but there's several different planning processes going on. Crisisnow.org is doing a lot of work around 988. The Transform 911 work that is just kicked off out of the University of Chicago is really awesome. If folks have an interest in looking at 911 and how those protocols need to shift. And then next week, there's the Taking the Call convening about community responder models. So I would encourage folks who are interested to check those out.
Thank you all. We'll keep going through the questions. I think Jennifer had to drop off. And again, we're tracking these questions. Ones that we don't get to, we'll work to get answers back to you all by email or some other means. So we're committed to please get your questions in. And if we don't have time for them, we'll find ways to get answers back to the community. I'm trying to go through order that I see them come in. So Commissioner Jacobs, I think it was less a question than a comment that you raised, highlighting the homeless street outreach program we have here, a community paramedicine program, and other things that we can build on. So let me just say that we are, I think one of our presenters talked about the local context of this work. And I think we are trying to be mindful as we think about this, about what pieces we can build on, both of the things you named and of things that maybe other community-based resources. So just wanted to say yes and to that we are engaging with those groups and others. Next question is, what proportion of time are your responders actively on calls? And a second piece of that is, did you have a goal for the amount of time they should be responding to calls versus follow-up or proactive work? And I can
I'm trying to be polite and let other folks go, so I'm not dominating. But for a therapist, I am not as comfortable with silence as I probably should be. You know, we are our STAR team currently we're hiring, but we've been running just the one team every day. So our team doesn't have a ton of time for follow-up. Pretty much our entire shift is responding to those calls. Thanks to the co-responder program here in Denver, we do have some case managers that are employed with that program, who we do rely on quite a bit, you know, to go follow up with folks who may need some additional contact, not necessarily a crisis response, but more of a hands-on case management approach. And those case managers have connected around 400 individuals contacted on STAR with ongoing supports and services beyond what STAR's been able to provide in the moment. A little different data point, but something that I do think is interesting to bring up in this context is that our data shows that STAR clears calls about 8 minutes faster than traditional law enforcement response. And I think that just shows that sending the right experts to a call, you know, really helps things run efficiently. We get what we call an 8-minute head start on a traditional officer response when comparing the same call, just because this is very much our wheelhouse. So we're able to, you know, be a little bit quicker.
I can add just in terms of follow-up. Our team does do follow-up, particularly if, you know, oftentimes we go out to a call and the person is no longer there. Right. So we will attempt to, you know, go back out to the area and try and make that connection with them in the next few days. Also, folks will decline services, but may, like the example earlier, may accept a pair of socks or bottle of water, and our team will say, listen, is it okay if we come back out and visit with you? So we try and build that into our response. We are also actually going to be hiring a dedicated outreach team that will be responsible only for follow-up, both with folks that we haven't built too much of a connection with, and for folks that are already participants with a care navigator, but that we haven't seen them in a while and we want to check on them and see how they're doing. So we are trying to build in that outreach follow-up component. The other thing I'll add is just that I do think what has been important for us here in Atlanta is that when we receive information from the caller, when they provide their follow-up information through 311, we will reach out to every caller that provides their information. So even if we don't make contact with the person that we wanted to, or if we do, we're able to call that caller back, have a conversation with them, and really invite them into sort of just being a good neighbor, and also do some problem solving with us, so that to try and kind of stave off some of the frustration people might feel, and also just the feeling of like, okay, I called and then you don't know what happened. So we obviously we have a deep respect for people's privacy. We're not sharing like details of our interactions, but we are having that kind of follow up with the callers as well, and we're encouraging them, if they need to reach us again, to call us back through 311.
Thanks. I'm going to go on to another question here. So, I think one of the common concerns probably in a lot of cities that are starting this work is around safety of responders that are going out to calls that we have traditionally been sending armed responders to. And you all spoke on that. I think most of you, or all of you in all of your presentations. A follow-up question to that is, can you share how teams are trained for safety? In the few times where they do need police backup, what are some examples of situations? What are some example situations that are different from most of the calls?
I can speak briefly to this because I think I already said a couple things about sort of where our data lands on this, but a lot of our training, I think this is, again, one of those things where we really need to think about what we're actually shifting. And part of that is the perspective on what these crises entail and what role the response plays in the escalation of them. So when we do respond, for a lot of people, when the response involves a weapon or a uniform, whether that uniform is a bus driver uniform or a police uniform, it can be a uniform, can be triggering, things can escalate. We have found that with the training we offer, and I can speak to that very briefly as well, but also the disciplines that these folks come with, a mental health clinician, and especially someone with lived experience, I've seen it firsthand. It is a science, but it is also a bit of an art. And it's really just building a relationship. It is really reassuring somebody that they are not in trouble for suffering in that moment. That type of different approach and leveling with somebody can really de-escalate a situation. We have, as I mentioned, we have no violence and no arrests in the over 3,000 calls that we have done so far in the first 10 months of our pilot. And this is also with our teams going out without law enforcement. There have been some situations where law enforcement backup was required. There have been times where it was suspected that a firearm was present. That is something where we would not want our teams to be going into, but they're incredibly rare. Less than 5% of our calls result in requiring a law enforcement backup. The other piece around training is that a lot of training around situational and spatial awareness is incredibly important. Working with a paramedic, that has been helpful because they get that training as part of their discipline. But I also the training, we all do a lot of Zoom stuff, and as fulfilling as this is, it can't be the whole world when you're actually asking people to go out in the world and engage with people. And so to start, we had the luxury of sort of week-long intensives where we had the teams and the team members, so the people I'm going to be looking at when I'm on the van, and talking to and saying, I feel safe, I don't feel safe, how do you feel today, where are we going to get lunch, whatever, this setting our day together, how do you feel about what just happened? those people need to be in the room together, and they need to be learning together and role playing together and practicing communication. Communication in terms of safety is key. And we were able to partner with someone named Preston Looper, who is an expert on mobile crisis response based out of Texas. He helped us with some of our initial trainings. We also have built into our model clinical supervisors. So those are people who understand the work on the rig, but who also have a lot of clinical experience and training on trauma-informed interventions, nonviolent communication. But I just want to acknowledge that the safety concerns are very real. They are very real anytime we engage with people out on the street, people who we don't know, when we are serving the public. And also, this approach is aimed at reducing escalation and reducing violence for everyone involved. And I think it's incredibly successful. That I think the data shows that's incredibly successful in that. And when that comes into play, the question around safety is not just safety for our teams, but safety for those that we serve. And so it's a really beautiful thing to see. And I would never underscore the importance of training around safety for the team members, especially newer people, newer clinicians, or folks who are peers coming into this work for the first time. And also, it's a bit of a paradigm shift, because formerly triggering elements like sirens and uniforms, when you take those out, it can be a different story.
I just want to add to that. I know we're down to our last minute here, but every community pretty much across the country has community-based mental health workers that are essentially going out and doing this work every day without a radio where someone knows where they are, without the support of dispatch. As a case manager, these were the same folks in the same places, doing the same things who I was outreaching throughout my entire career. I also think it's important to, remember that the behaviors that are sometimes associated with mental health and behavioral health crisis don't necessarily mean that you're unsafe. We're contacting folks. If stars showing up, it's typically not a great day. They may be agitated, they may be angry, they may be sad, the whole gamut. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm in an unsafe situation.
Thank you for that. Okay, I have asked Shannon if she could just as a closing share the screen of the things that you all lifted up that you would like to hear, or that you would like to see here. They're just things that struck you as yes and moments. Let me say that we're going to share this. We'll share these answers back with all of you. But I thought maybe just very briefly we could scroll through. I won't read them all out. Maybe I'll just read out some as we go, but we'll share them out with you. So I saw peer support specialists as responders, response teams that do not include armed officers, harm reduction specialist, use of 911 or another number to appropriate route and divert calls, build public awareness of alternative non-emergency number and when to use it, also care navigators. I love the respect for people experiencing crises and their needs and choices, and the broad range of assistance provided. Also the proactive aspects. Great that people can reach this assistance through 911 and otherwise. A team of community paramedic behavioral health specialists and peer support specialists seems like a great way to address physical and mental health needs and the needs for case management and longer-term support. A key part of the trauma of crisis is feeling alone. The presence of experiential peers, people who might have experienced similar crises, is powerful. Also so empowering for people on that healing journey to have leadership and advocacy roles. Creating relationships with communities without the threat of harm or arrest when in the community. A central location for those who are asking for money, in parentheses, panhandlers, to receive basic essentials, in parentheses, mask, bottled water, light snacks, and then provide access to community resources there. Baked in culture change component to engage with people calling too as being part of a solution recognizing everyone as people and neighbors. The follow-up care, exclamation point, coordinated connection to necessary services more likely to reduce harm and prevent future crises. And I know if I did not read one that you put, if there was no intention in that, I was just reading some as they came to give us a sense. And again, we will share out this full list with all of you for the questions that you asked that we did not get to. We'll work and to see if we can get some answers to those and follow up with you all. Again, to our guests today, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking time. I appreciate the work that you are doing in your cities. That it takes a lot of time there. It would be easy to keep your head down and focus there, but to have an expansive love, not only for your own town, but for others. Thank you. It is a gift of your time. We appreciate the work you're doing, and we hope that we can stay in community and continue to learn from each other as we do this work together. So thanks. And Manju, I ask a question of you, if you don't mind. I know we're closing out. Who is the other person closing out with me?
Me.
Great. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, that thank you. I really want to echo it, Ryan. I felt like a full body sigh of relief hearing this conversation. It feels so close, and we've been really deep in conversations across our city, especially around gun violence and all the reverberations around gun violence and mental health, and all the reverberations around mental health, and just the access needs that we're struggling with, people's intense experiences around income loss and challenges around childcare over these very difficult past 2 years. And this whole morning has given me so much hope. On this tip, I want to just ask what's coming up for you as you hear what's happening all over Durham to creatively keep each other safe. These powerful, poignant, effective examples in other parts of the country of what compassionate, skilled crisis response can look like. What's coming up for you? Please go down to the reaction smiley face and press on it, and then you can raise your hand icon to let us know if there's something you want to share with this circle. Ryan, can I ask what's coming up for you in your body, in your spirit, in your thinking about where we go from here?
For me, yes, sure. I mean, I feel, in listening to our fellow Durham neighbors and residents who joined on this call as we started today, and then going on throughout to hearing from other cities who are doing, I think, really good work, I'm left just with a lot of hope and a lot of belief that there are good things that we can do here, that we can do them together. I think that this is an exciting time for us to really be in a space of believing together, that there are ways that we can continue to meet and better meet the needs of people that we care about, of the people who live with us and in our community. I think we've heard many good things today, and I just feel a sense that this is work that we can do, and that work that I'm excited in community with all of you to be advancing this year. So just a sense of real optimism, a sense of seeing the possibilities, but that's a high level.
Thank you. We'd like to invite any announcements, any community announcements that you'd really like everyone in this room to know about. We have a couple from our SRO roundtable. It's going to be convening some listening sessions soon. there anyone from the SRO Roundtable of the Safety and Wellness Task Force who could announce the upcoming listening sessions? Or one of our co-chairs?
So there was a link placed in the chat much earlier. I'm trying to rewind back to the chat now concerning that. And if I can find it, I'll repost it.
Also just include it in our follow-up email, but I can share aloud that if you are a student of color who's attending a DPS high school that has a school resource officer, or if you know students of color attending DPS high schools with an SRO, we're having both English and Spanish accessible listening sessions. And the Durham Community Safety and Wellness Task Force would like to offer $125 stipends for those who are able to coordinate a youth SRO listening session at your school this fall. So if you have a teenager in your life who might be able to host this space, or if you are a teenager who's able to host this space, let us know. And we'll send a follow-up email with this flyer in Spanish and English. There's also an invitation from Durham Beyond Policing Coalition to a workshop that we'll be having next week. Pull up the information about that too. Any other announcements? Somewhere you'd like us to be? Shanice, isn't Durham for All hosting an event tomorrow? Power to the polls?
Yep, from 12 to 3 p.m. We will be hosting our Power to the Polls and getting on the phones and calling folks to make sure that they have a plan to vote in this election. I can share the link for that to sign up.
I see Abby's hand.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm feeling called to share a moment of gratitude that, I'm sure we all have very different points of contact with this whole task force. Maybe it's the first time today, maybe it's from the formation of the task force, maybe it's years and years of advocating and organizing. And I just want to say it's not easy. It's both, I'm sure, exciting and terrifying to share this in this way with the larger world. And I just want to hold a moment of gratitude for everyone here who's really put this together and worked for years advocating. It's a really exciting moment. And I'm just even prouder to be here in this city with everyone today. And I hope I get to bump into people in person at some point and onward. But I just want to hold space for people who've organized this today, that this was really meaningful and incredible and forward looking in a way that feels great.
Manju, could I share a couple of other things? Would that be okay? So one, I just want to make sure that to invite you all back tomorrow. So we're doing this again tomorrow. It's even a fuller day. It starts at 9 a.m. We hope that you can join for any and all of it. I think just if you've signed up, I'm sure you'll get the reminder link, but we look forward to seeing you back tomorrow, where we can continue to learn and build together. I also there is a survey that has been chatted in. There's both an English and Spanish version of this. And we would love for you to take time now before you end our meeting space today to fill that out. I think it's really helpful and useful information for us about this experience for you, about capturing some information that can really be helpful as we continue to work together on this. And also, in case you're not here tomorrow, I want to say that this is meant to not be the last and only, but the beginning of many ways in which I think, I know that for the task force, and I'll speak for the department too, that we hope to be an ongoing community and engagement and working together with all of you and all the others who could not be here today around this work. So we now have your information, and if you have, especially if you have indicated that you want to remain involved, you can look out for additional opportunities to do that. So I'll turn it back over to you to close this out, Manju, and just thank you all for this space today, for your participation. I hope to see you back tomorrow, and please fill out the survey.
Put the link in the chat for people to sign up for the Transformative Justice 101 workshop next Thursday with Durham Beyond Policing Coalition. Thank you, Ajax, for naming Third Friday at Hayti Heritage Center this evening, 6 to 10, with Escape theme. And I wanted to say the survey for input and to stay in touch is really important. It's like just lifeblood for folks holding spaces like these to get feedback about how it felt to you and what would have made it better. Can we just take one deep breath as we depart together? We can allow this breath to move through our bodies and help us allow all this information to land. And we can also use it to feel connected to each other in this time of isolation. So gather your breath with me. Inhale. And go ahead and release. Thanks so much. See you tomorrow. Bring someone to the space tomorrow.